Sometimes, all it takes is one person who stops and looks into your eyes to remind you that you still exist. Sometimes, all it takes is one word spoken with love to restore your faith in tomorrow. Karl stood on the street with a violin in his hands. He was tired. He was forgotten. He had a family he loved but could not feed. Every day he played. Every day, people passed him by. One December evening, however, a woman stopped. She was not wealthy. She was not different from the others. But she did something no one else had done. She listened to him. She saw him. And she spoke words that changed everything. This is a story about Karl, about his family, about the woman who gave him back hope, and about how a small gesture can cause great miracles. Can one moment of kindness truly change an entire life? Sometimes all it takes is one person who stops and looks into your eyes to remind you that you still exist. Sometimes all it takes is one word spoken with love to restore your faith in tomorrow. Karl stood on the street with a violin in his hands. He was tired. He was forgotten. He had a family he loved but could not feed. Every day he played. Every day people passed him by. One December evening, however, a woman stopped. She was not wealthy. She was not different from the others. But she did something no one else had done. She listened to him. She saw him. And she spoke words that changed everything. This is a story about Karl, about his family, about the woman who gave him back hope, and about how a small gesture can cause great miracles. Can one moment of kindness truly change an entire life? If this story touches your heart, please take a moment to tell us where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of kindness, give this video a like and subscribe, because tomorrow I have something truly special prepared for you. Let us know what acts of kindness have changed your life. We would love to hear your stories. The winter wind cut through the narrow streets of the old city like a blade made of ice. Karl Novak stood at his usual corner near the town square, his fingers wrapped around the neck of his violin. The instrument was old, much older than his 38 years. It had belonged to his father, and before that, to his grandfather. The varnish was cracked and faded. The wood had darkened with age and wear. But when Karl drew the bow across the strings, the sound that emerged was still beautiful, still full of a warmth that seemed to defy the cold around him. He had been standing on this corner for 3 years now. 3 long years since he lost his job at the factory. 3 years since the bills began piling up faster than he could count them. 3 years since he swallowed his pride and brought his father's violin out into the world, hoping that strangers might drop a few coins into the battered case at his feet. Karl was not a beggar by nature. He had been raised to work hard, to provide for his family, to stand on his own 2 feet. His father had been a carpenter, a man with rough hands and a gentle heart. His mother had worked in a bakery, rising before dawn to knead dough and shape loaves. They had taught him the value of honest labor, the dignity that came from earning your own way. But the world had changed. The factory where Karl had worked for 15 years closed its doors without warning. The owner declared bankruptcy and disappeared overnight. 200 men lost their jobs in a single day. Karl had searched for work. He had knocked on every door, filled out every application, stood in every line. But there were too many men and too few jobs. The city was struggling. Everyone was struggling. So Karl did the only thing he knew how to do. He played his violin. He had learned as a boy, sitting beside his grandfather in the small living room of their apartment. The old man had been patient, guiding Karl's small fingers across the strings, teaching him scales and simple melodies. Music had been a joy then, something shared between generations, a way to fill the evenings with beauty. Now it was survival. Now it was the only thing standing between his family and complete destitution. Karl played every day from morning until night. He played through rain and snow, through heat and cold. His fingers grew calloused and stiff. His back ached from standing. His feet went numb in his worn boots. But he played because he had no choice. He played because his wife Maria and his daughter Teresa depended on him. Maria had been beautiful once, or rather she was still beautiful, but the years of hardship had etched lines of worry into her face. She worked as a seamstress, taking in mending and alterations from neighbors who could barely afford to pay her. She sat at their small kitchen table late into the night, her fingers moving quickly over fabric, her eyes straining in the dim light. She never complained. She never blamed Karl for their situation. But he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged when she thought no one was looking. He heard her quiet tears sometimes in the darkness of their bedroom, muffled into her pillow so as not to wake him. It broke his heart. He felt like a failure. He felt like he was letting her down every single day. And then there was Teresa. Sweet Teresa with her bright eyes and her infectious laugh. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that fell in waves around her face. She was the light of Karl's life, the reason he forced himself to pick up his violin each morning, even when his body screamed for rest. Teresa loved music. She would stand beside him sometimes on the corner, humming along to his melodies, her voice pure and clear. She did not understand why they were poor. She did not understand why other children had new clothes and toys, while she wore hand-me-downs and played with broken dolls. She only knew that her father played beautiful music, and that people sometimes smiled when they heard it. Karl's usual spot was near the fountain in the town square. It was a good location, busy with foot traffic, visible from multiple directions. Tourists passed through sometimes, though not as often as they used to. Local shoppers hurried by on their way to the market. Office workers crossed the square during their lunch breaks. Most of them ignored him. They had seen him so many times that he had become part of the scenery, as invisible as the cobblestones beneath their feet. Some people actively avoided him, crossing to the other side of the square so they would not have to acknowledge his presence. Others glanced at him with pity or disdain, their expressions making it clear what they thought of a grown man, reduced to begging on the street. But Karl was not begging. He was playing. He poured his heart into every note, every phrase, every melody. He played songs his grandfather had taught him, old folk tunes that spoke of love and loss and longing. He played classical pieces he had learned from borrowed books at the library, compositions by masters whose names carried weight and history. He played with his eyes closed sometimes, losing himself in the music, forgetting for brief moments where he was and why he was there. In those moments he was free. In those moments he was not a poor man struggling to survive. He was an artist creating beauty in a world that desperately needed it. The days blurred together. Winter gave way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn. And then winter returned, colder and harsher than before. Karl's violin case collected coins slowly. On a good day, he might earn enough to buy bread and milk, and a few vegetables for soup. On a bad day, he went home with barely enough for a loaf of stale bread. Maria stretched every coin as far as it would go. She made soups that lasted for days. She darned socks until there was more thread than original fabric. She cut her own hair to save money. She never bought anything for herself. Everything went to keeping the family fed and the rent paid. They lived in a small apartment on the 4th floor of an old building with no elevator. The walls were thin. The plumbing was unreliable. The heating barely worked in winter. But it was home. It was shelter. It was all they could afford. Karol climbed those 4 flights of stairs every evening, his legs heavy, his spirit heavier. He would open the door to find Maria cooking at the stove and Teresa doing her homework at the kitchen table. They would smile when they saw him, and he would smile back, and for a little while they would pretend that everything was fine. They would eat their simple meal together. They would talk about their day. Teresa would tell him about school, about her friends, about the stories she was reading. Maria would show him the dress she was mending or the shirt she was altering. And Karol would feel a bittersweet mixture of love and shame, grateful for his family, but devastated by his inability to give them more. At night, after Teresa was asleep, Karol and Maria would sit together in the darkness of their small living room. They did not talk much. There was not much to say. They had already discussed their situation 1,000 times. There were no solutions they had not already considered. No opportunities they had not already pursued. They simply sat together, drawing comfort from each other's presence, holding hands in the darkness, 2 people bound together by love and circumstance, doing their best to survive in a world that seemed determined to grind them down. Karol would think about his father sometimes, about the strong man who had built furniture with his own hands, who had provided for his family with dignity and pride. He wondered what his father would think of him now. Would he be disappointed? Would he understand? Would he tell Karol to keep fighting or to accept defeat? But Karol could not accept defeat, not while his daughter still looked at him with trust and love, not while his wife still believed in him despite everything. So every morning he picked up his violin, descended those 4 flights of stairs, walked through the narrow streets to the town square, and took his place near the fountain. He lifted his violin to his shoulder, positioned his bow, and began to play. The music flowed out into the cold air, a voice crying out in the wilderness, a prayer sent up to an indifferent sky. Most people walked past without stopping. Most people did not even turn their heads. But Karol played anyway. He played because it was all he had left. He played because music was the one thing no one could take away from him. He played because somewhere deep inside, beneath all the exhaustion and disappointment and fear, there was still a small flame of hope that refused to die. December came again, bringing with it bitter cold and early darkness. The Christmas season approached, but Karol felt no joy in it. Christmas had once been his favorite time of year, a season of warmth and celebration, of family gatherings and shared meals, of Teresa's excitement over small gifts and simple pleasures. But now Christmas only meant more pressure, more expectations, more awareness of everything they did not have. Other children would receive new toys and warm clothes. Other families would feast on roasted meat and fresh bread and sweet cakes. Other homes would be filled with light and laughter and music. Karol's home would be dark and cold and quiet, marked by absence rather than abundance. He stood on his corner as the December wind howled through the square, biting through his thin coat, numbing his fingers even as he tried to keep them moving across the strings. Fewer people ventured out in such weather. Those who did hurried past quickly, their heads down, their hands buried in their pockets, their minds focused on getting indoors as fast as possible. Karl's violin case remained mostly empty. A few small coins lay scattered across the worn velvet lining, barely enough to matter. His stomach growled with hunger. He had not eaten since the previous evening, a thin soup Maria had made from potato peelings and a single carrot. He felt light-headed, his vision blurred at the edges. But he kept playing. He had to keep playing. There was nothing else he could do. The evening when everything changed began like any other. Karl stood at his corner as the December darkness descended over the city. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting pools of yellow light across the cobblestones. The fountain behind him had been turned off for the winter, its basin empty except for a few dead leaves that skittered across the stone in the wind. Karl's fingers were so cold he could barely feel them anymore. Each note he played required conscious effort, his muscles moving more from memory than sensation. The melody that emerged from his violin was haunting and melancholic, a reflection of his inner state, a song of loss and longing that seemed to blend with the winter wind itself. Most of the shops around the square were closing for the evening. Shopkeepers pulled down their shutters and locked their doors. The cafe on the corner dimmed its lights. The bookstore across the way went dark. Soon the square would be empty, except for Karl, and he would pack up his violin and make the long walk home through streets that grew more dangerous after nightfall. He had perhaps another half-hour before it would be foolish to remain. The coins in his case amounted to less than he needed. It had been a particularly bad day. He would have to tell Maria that they could not afford meat for the rest of the week. He would have to see the disappointment in her eyes, even as she assured him that everything would be fine. Karl was playing a piece his grandfather had loved, a slow and mournful tune that spoke of winter and hardship and the stubborn resilience of the human spirit. His eyes were closed as he played, his body swaying slightly with the music. He did not see the woman approaching until she was standing directly in front of him. When he opened his eyes, he was startled to find her there. So close he could have reached out and touched her. She was perhaps in her mid-50s, dressed in a simple wool coat that had seen better days. Her hair was grey and pulled back in a loose bun. Her face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that came from a lifetime of smiling, though she was not smiling now. She was simply standing there, listening, her eyes fixed on Karl with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Karl stopped playing. The sudden silence felt loud in his ears. He waited for the woman to drop a coin in his case and move on, but she did not move. She continued to stand there, looking at him with those piercing eyes, as if she could see straight through to his soul. Karl shifted his weight from one foot to the other, unsure what to do. He was not accustomed to people actually paying attention to him. Most interactions with passers-by were brief and impersonal. A coin dropped, a nod exchanged, nothing more. But this woman seemed in no hurry to leave. She seemed to be studying him, measuring him, searching for something in his face. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, cutting through the wind. "You play beautifully," she said. "Where did you learn?" Karl was taken aback by the question. No one ever asked him questions. No one ever engaged him in conversation. He was invisible, a fixture of the landscape, not a person worth knowing. He stammered slightly as he replied. "My grandfather taught me," he said, "when I was a boy." The woman nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. "I could hear the grief in your playing," she said, "and the love. Those two things together, grief and love, they make the most powerful music." Karl did not know how to respond. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if this stranger had opened a door into his heart that he had tried to keep locked. He looked down at his violin, at the worn wood and cracked varnish, at the strings that he could barely afford to replace when they broke. "I play to feed my family," he said quietly. "That is all." The woman shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "You play because you have something to say. You play because music is in your blood. The fact that you must also earn your living this way does not diminish the art. If anything, it makes it more honest." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. She placed it in Karl's violin case, not tossing it carelessly like others did with their coins, but setting it down deliberately, as if it were something precious. "I am not wealthy," the woman said, "but I know what it means to struggle. I know what it means to feel invisible." She paused, her eyes never leaving Karl's face. "I also know that sometimes the smallest acts of recognition can save a person's life. So I am recognizing you now. I am telling you that you matter, that your music matters, that the world would be darker without it." Karl felt something crack open inside his chest, some wall he had built around his heart to protect himself from the constant rejection and indifference of the world. He felt tears sting his eyes, and he blinked them back fiercely, not wanting to cry in front of this stranger. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. "You do not know what that means to me." The woman smiled then, a small, sad smile that carried its own weight of experience. "I think I do," she said. "My name is Anna. I work at the community center on Dluha Street. We have been trying to organize a winter concert, something to bring warmth and hope to people during these dark months. Would you consider playing for us? We cannot pay much, but it would be a real audience, people who would come specifically to hear you." Karl stared at her in disbelief. A concert? A real concert with an audience? He had not played for a proper audience in years, not since he was a young man performing at his cousin's wedding. The idea seemed impossible, too good to be true. He started, then stopped, unsure what to say. "I am just a street musician," he finally said. "I am not trained. I do not read music well anymore. I only know old songs." Anna waved her hand dismissively. "The old songs are the best songs," she said. "They carry history in them. They carry truth. And you do not need formal training to move people's hearts. I have heard hundreds of musicians in my life. Some had all the training in the world and left me cold. You standing here on this frozen corner made me stop and listen. That is gift. That is something no amount of training can teach." She pulled out a small card from her pocket and handed it to Karl. "Come to this address on Saturday at 2 in the afternoon," she said. "We will talk about the concert. We will make arrangements, and please, bring your daughter if you wish. I have a feeling she would enjoy seeing the space." Karl took the card with trembling fingers. How did she know he had a daughter? He had not mentioned Teresa. Anna seemed to read his confusion. "I have seen you here before," she said gently. "Not often, but a few times. I have seen the little girl who sometimes stands beside you, humming along to your music. She has your eyes." Karl felt overwhelmed. This woman had noticed him, had really seen him. Not just once in passing, but multiple times. She had paid attention. She had cared enough to remember. "I will come," he said. "On Saturday. I will be there." Anna nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said. "I will see you then." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at him. "One more thing," she said. "Do not open that envelope until you get home. And when you do open it, do not feel guilty about accepting it. Sometimes we must allow others to help us. There is no shame in that. There is only shame in refusing help out of pride when your family needs you to swallow that pride." With those words, she walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the streetlights. Karl stood frozen for a long moment, staring after her, trying to process what had just happened. He looked down at the envelope in his violin case. It was plain white, unsealed, with nothing written on it. He picked it up carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding. Something had shifted in the universe. Some door had opened that he had thought was permanently closed. He did not understand it. He did not know if he could trust it. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than despair. He felt a flicker of hope. Karl packed up his violin quickly, his movements hurried and clumsy. He counted the coins in his case. There was even less than he thought. But the envelope in his pocket felt heavy with possibility. He did not know what was inside it. Money, obviously. But how much? Enough for a meal? Enough for a week of meals? He would not allow himself to hope for too much. Disappointment hurt less when expectations were low. He secured his violin in its case, tucked it under his arm, and began the walk home through the dark streets. The wind had picked up, throwing bits of ice and snow into his face. But Karl barely noticed. His mind was racing with questions. Who was Anna? Why had she stopped for him specifically? What did she see in his playing that made her think he was worthy of performing in a concert? And what would Maria say when he told her? The walk home seemed shorter than usual. Karl climbed the 4 flights of stairs with energy he had not felt in months. He burst through the door of their apartment, startling Maria, who was sitting at the kitchen table mending a torn shirt. Teresa looked up from her homework, her eyes wide. "Papa," she said, "you are home early." Karl set down his violin case and pulled off his coat, his fingers fumbling with the buttons. "Something happened," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "A woman stopped. She listened to me play. She said I was good. She invited me to play at a concert, a real concert." Maria stood up slowly, the shirt falling from her hands. "A concert?" she repeated, her voice careful, as if she was afraid to believe. "Yes," Karl said, "at the community center on Dluha Street. This Saturday I am supposed to go meet with her, to talk about arrangements." He pulled the card from his pocket and showed it to Maria. She took it, examined it, ran her thumb over the printed address. "This is real," she said softly. "This is a real address, a real place." Karl nodded vigorously. "And she gave me something," he said, pulling out the envelope. "She told me not to open it until I got home. She said not to feel guilty about accepting help." Maria and Karl looked at each other, years of shared hardship and unspoken understanding passing between them. Together they sat down at the kitchen table. Teresa abandoned her homework and came to stand beside them, sensing that something important was happening. Karl opened the envelope carefully, his fingers clumsy with anticipation. Inside was money. Paper bills, neatly folded. Karl's hands shook as he pulled them out and counted. Once, twice, 3 times, not believing what he was seeing. There was enough money in the envelope to pay a month's rent. enough to buy food for weeks, enough to buy Teresa a new winter coat, enough to breathe. Maria covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. Teresa looked up at her parents with confusion and concern. "Mama," she said, "why are you crying?" Maria pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tight. "These are happy tears, my love," she said. "These are tears of gratitude." Karol sat staring at the money on the table, unable to fully comprehend what had happened. A stranger had given him this. A woman he did not know, who owed him nothing, had handed him a lifeline when he was drowning. She had seen him, really seen him, and she had chosen to help. That night, the Novak family sat around their small kitchen table long after Teresa had gone to bed. The money lay spread out before them, more cash than they had seen at one time in years. Maria kept touching it, as if to confirm it was real, as if it might disappear if she looked away. Karol told her everything about the encounter with Anna, every word exchanged, every gesture, every detail he could remember. Maria listened with her hands folded in her lap, her expression shifting between disbelief and cautious hope. When Karol finished speaking, they sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of possibility heavy in the air between them. "We must be careful," Maria said finally. "We must not spend this money foolishly. We must make it last." Karol nodded. He knew she was right. They had been living on the edge for so long that any windfall, no matter how significant, could disappear quickly if they were not disciplined. "The rent first," he said. "That gives us security for another month. Then food, proper food, meat, fresh vegetables, bread that is not stale." Maria made notes on a scrap of paper, her seamstress fingers holding the pencil delicately. "Teresa needs new shoes," she added. "Hers have holes in the soles. I have been putting cardboard inside them, but her feet are always wet and cold." Karol felt a familiar pang of guilt and shame. His daughter walking around in shoes with holes while he stood on street corners playing music. What kind of father was he? Maria seemed to sense his thoughts. She reached across the table and took his hand. "You are doing everything you can," she said firmly. "No one could do more. This woman, Anna, she saw that. She saw your effort, your dignity, your art. That is why she helped us." Karol squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her words. "What if the concert does not happen?" he said quietly. "What if I go on Saturday and she has changed her mind? What if this was just a moment of impulse and she regrets it?" Maria shook her head. "Then we will still have this money. We will still have had this one good day. We will still know that someone in this city sees you as more than a beggar. That alone is worth something." She paused, her thumb rubbing circles on the back of his hand. "But I do not think she will change her mind. The way you described her, the way she spoke to you, that was not impulse. That was intention. She has a plan. You are part of it now." Karol wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust that this turn of good fortune was real and lasting. But years of disappointment had taught him to guard his heart, to expect the worst, so that the worst would hurt less when it came. The next morning, Karol woke before dawn as he always did. For a moment he lay in the darkness, listening to Maria's quiet breathing beside him, and wondered if the previous evening had been a dream. But when he rose and walked to the kitchen, the money was still there on the table where they had left it, real and tangible and undeniable. He made coffee, a luxury they usually could not afford, using beans Maria had been hoarding for a special occasion. If this was not a special occasion, Nothing was. The smell filled their small apartment, rich and comforting. When Maria emerged from the bedroom, drawn by the aroma, she smiled at him with such warmth that his heart ached. They had breakfast together, a real breakfast with eggs and bread and butter. Teresa came to the table, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and stopped short when she saw the food. "Is it someone's birthday?" she asked. Carol and Maria exchanged glances. "No," Carol said, "but yesterday something good happened. Papa met a kind woman who gave us a gift. So today we celebrate." Teresa did not ask questions. She simply sat down and ate with the unself-conscious joy of a child, her legs swinging under the table, her face bright with happiness. Carol watched her and felt his resolve harden. He would go to that community center on Saturday. He would meet with Anna. He would do whatever was asked of him. If there was even the smallest chance that this could lead to something better for his family, he had to pursue it. After breakfast, Carol prepared to go to his usual corner. Maria stopped him at the door. "You do not have to go today," she said. "We have enough now. You could rest. Your hands need rest." Carol shook his head. "If I do not go, people will wonder. And I cannot stop. Not yet. Not until I know if this concert is real." Maria understood. She helped him into his coat, adjusting his collar, her fingers lingering on his shoulders. "Be careful," she said. "Come home before dark." Carol promised he would. He kissed her forehead, then Teresa's, and descended the 4 flights of stairs into the cold morning. The city looked different somehow. The streets were the same. The buildings were the same. The people hurrying past were the same. But Carol felt different, and that changed everything. He walked with his head higher. His steps were lighter. When he reached his corner near the fountain, he set up as he always did, but there was a new energy in his movements. He lifted his violin to his shoulder and began to play. The music that flowed from his instrument was brighter today, more hopeful, touched by the possibility of change. A few people stopped to listen. One woman dropped a generous handful of coins into his case. An old man paused to tell him that his playing reminded him of his youth. Small kindnesses, but they accumulated throughout the day like snow building into drifts. Carol played with renewed purpose. He thought about the concert, about standing on a real stage, about people coming specifically to hear him. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. What if he forgot the music? What if his hands shook? What if people were disappointed? He pushed the fears aside. He could not afford to be paralyzed by doubt. He had been given an opportunity, a chance, and he had to take it. Between songs, he practiced pieces he had not played in years, dusting off melodies from his memory, testing his fingers on complicated passages. He was rusty. There was no denying it. But the skill was still there, buried beneath years of survival playing, waiting to be rediscovered. As the day wore on, Carol found himself watching for Anna, hoping she might pass by again. But she did not appear. He supposed there was no reason she would. She had given him the card. She had told him when to come. There was nothing more to say until Saturday, but he would have liked to see her again, to confirm that she was real, that the encounter had truly happened. By late afternoon, as the winter sun began its early descent, Carl packed up his violin. He had earned more today than usual, perhaps because his playing had been better, or perhaps simply because the universe was smiling on him for once. He walked home through streets that were beginning to fill with evening commuters. The shops were lighting their windows for the night. A bakery released the smell of fresh bread into the cold air. Carl paused outside, looking at the loaves displayed in the window, golden and perfect. On impulse, he went inside and bought one, warm from the oven, using some of the money from Anna's envelope. It was an extravagance, but a small one, and he wanted to bring something home to his family, something to show them that good things were still possible in this world. The baker wrapped the bread in paper and handed it to him with a smile. Karl thanked her and continued home, the bread warm against his chest. When he arrived at the apartment, Maria was at the stove making soup. The smell of onions and potatoes filled the room. Teresa was sitting at the table drawing pictures with the stub of a pencil. Karl set the bread on the table with a flourish. "I bring gifts," he announced. Teresa squealed with delight and threw her arms around his waist. Maria turned from the stove, her face softening when she saw the bread. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I wanted to," Karl replied. "Today was a good day. I played well. People listened. I want us to remember that good days are possible." They ate dinner together, tearing chunks from the warm bread, dipping them in the soup. Teresa chattered about her day at school, about the story her teacher had read, about the game she had played with her friends at recess. Karl listened, really listened, present in a way he had not been able to be for a long time. Worry had consumed him for so long that he had forgotten how to simply enjoy his family. But tonight, for a few hours, he allowed himself to relax. The rent was paid. There was food in the cupboard. His daughter was happy. His wife was smiling. These were not small things. These were everything. After Teresa was in bed, Karl sat at the table with a cup of tea, the card Anna had given him in his hand. He studied the address. Dluha Street was not far, perhaps a 20-minute walk from their apartment. The community center there was old, he knew, a converted warehouse that served the neighborhood with various programs and services. He had passed it before, but never paid much attention. Now it loomed large in his imagination, a place where his future might be decided. Saturday was 3 days away. 3 days to practice. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to hope and worry in equal measure. Maria joined him at the table, bringing her mending with her. She worked quietly, her needle flashing in the lamplight, while Karl sat lost in thought. "What will you play?" she asked after a while. "At the concert, if it happens. What will you play?" Karl had been thinking about this all day. "The old songs," he said. "The ones my grandfather taught me. The ones that have stories in them. Anna said those were the best songs, that they carry truth." Maria nodded. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said softly. "He always believed you had a gift." Karl felt emotion rise in his throat. His grandfather had been dead for 10 years, but he still missed him every day. The old man had been his teacher, his mentor, his friend. He had believed in Karl when no one else did. He had spent hours patiently correcting his bow hold, his finger placement, his posture. He had taught Karl that music was not just about technique, but about feeling, about pouring your soul into the instrument and letting it speak for you. "I hope I can do him justice," Karl said. "I hope I have not lost too much of what he taught me." "You have not lost it," Maria assured him. "I hear it every time you play. Even standing on that corner, even playing for strangers who do not listen, I can hear the beauty in your music. Others will hear it too. You must trust that." Karl wanted to trust. He wanted to believe that his years of struggle had not been in vain, that his music still mattered, that he had something valuable to offer the world. But doubt was a heavy companion. one that had lived with him so long he barely noticed its weight anymore. Still, Anna had seen something in him. A stranger had stopped and listened and been moved enough to act. That had to mean something. That had to count for something. The next 3 days passed in a blur of anxious preparation. Karl continued to play at his corner each day, but his mind was elsewhere, running through melodies, testing his memory, rehearsing conversations he might have with Anna. He practiced late into the night after Maria and Teresa were asleep, standing in their small living room with the violin tucked under his chin, playing as softly as he could so as not to wake the neighbors. His fingers found their way through pieces he had not touched in years. Some came back easily, muscle memory taking over. Others required work, patience, repetition. He made mistakes. He stumbled over passages that had once been effortless, but gradually, note by note, phrase by phrase, the music returned to him. Maria watched him with a mixture of concern and encouragement. She saw how little he slept, how he picked at his food, distracted and preoccupied. She saw the dark circles forming under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. But she also saw the spark that had returned to his gaze, the sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. Her husband was coming back to life, emerging from the fog of despair that had surrounded him. Whatever happened on Saturday, this transformation alone was worth celebrating. She made sure he ate properly. She brought him tea when he practiced. She sat with him in the quiet hours and listened, her hands busy with her mending, her heart full of love and hope. Friday evening arrived, the night before Karl was to meet Anna at the community center. He could not eat dinner. His stomach was twisted in knots. Teresa noticed his distraction and climbed into his lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Are you nervous, Papa?" she asked. Karl hugged her tight, breathing in the clean smell of her hair. "Yes," he admitted, "I am very nervous." Teresa pulled back and looked at him seriously. "Mama says you play the most beautiful music in the whole world," she said, "so you do not need to be nervous. You just need to play like you always do." Out of the mouths of children came such simple wisdom. Karl kissed her forehead. "You are right," he said. "I just need to play like I always do." But it was not that simple, and he knew it. Playing on a street corner for indifferent strangers was one thing. Playing in a concert hall, or whatever space the community center had, for people who had come specifically to judge his performance, that was something entirely different. The pressure was enormous. What if he failed? What if he disappointed Anna? What if he proved unworthy of the faith she had placed in him? The questions circled in his mind like vultures. That night, Karl lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Maria slept beside him. He could hear the wind rattling the windows, the old building creaking and settling around them. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. A car passed in the street below. The ordinary sounds of the city at night. Karl tried to calm his racing thoughts. He tried to remember what his grandfather had told him long ago, that music was not about perfection, but about honesty, about opening your heart and letting the truth pour out. "The audience can forgive mistakes," his grandfather had said, "but they cannot forgive dishonesty. Play from your soul and they will hear it." Karl clung to those words like a life raft. Saturday morning came too quickly. Karl rose before dawn, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his mind alert and wired. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the darkness outside slowly give way to grey winter light. Maria found him, there when she woke, his hands wrapped around an empty cup, his gaze distant. She came and stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders, kneading the tight muscles. "You are going to be wonderful," she said quietly. "I know you are." Karl reached up and covered her hand with his. "I hope so," he said. "I hope I do not let everyone down." The hours until 2 in the afternoon seemed to crawl by at an agonizing pace. Karl tried to distract himself with small tasks. He cleaned his violin carefully, polishing the wood, checking the strings, tightening the bow. He shaved and washed, wanting to look presentable. Maria insisted he wear his good shirt, the one she had carefully preserved for special occasions, and she pressed his trousers with their old iron. When he was dressed, she stepped back and looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You look like the man I married," she said. "The young musician with dreams in his eyes." Karl pulled her into his arms. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me, for never giving up, for being my strength when I had none." At 1:30, Karl prepared to leave. Teresa begged to come with him. Anna had said he could bring her, and truthfully, Karl wanted her there. Her presence calmed him, grounded him. Maria dressed Teresa in her best dress, brushed her hair until it shone, and tied it back with a faded ribbon. The three of them stood together in the small apartment, a family bound by love and struggle and stubborn hope. "We will wait to hear how it went," Maria said, kissing Karl's cheek. "Take your time. Do not rush home. Enjoy this moment." Karl nodded, took Teresa's hand, and together they descended the 4 flights of stairs and stepped out into the cold afternoon. The walk to Dluha Street felt surreal. Karl moved through the familiar city streets, but everything seemed slightly off-kilter, as if he had stepped into a parallel version of his life. Teresa chattered beside him, asking questions, pointing at things in shop windows, her excitement palpable. Karl tried to match her enthusiasm, but his nerves were jangling like discordant strings. When they turned onto Dluha Street, he saw the community center ahead, a large brick building with tall windows and a sign over the door. His steps slowed, his heart hammered in his chest. Teresa tugged at his hand. "Come on, Papa," she urged. "Do not be scared." They climbed the steps to the entrance. Karl pushed open the heavy door, and they stepped inside. The interior was warmer than outside, heated by old radiators that clanked and hissed. The space was open and high-ceilinged, clearly a converted industrial building. The floors were worn wood. The walls were painted a faded yellow. There were bulletin boards covered with notices and announcements, a small office area to one side, and further back what looked like a larger open room. A few people moved about, engaged in various activities. An older man was stacking chairs. A woman was sorting through boxes of clothing. It had the feel of a place well used and well loved by the community it served. Karl approached the office area uncertainly. A young woman sat at a desk, typing on an old computer. She looked up when she noticed him and smiled. "Can I help you?" she asked. Karl cleared his throat. "I am looking for Anna," he said. "She asked me to come here at 2. My name is Karl Novak." Recognition flashed across the woman's face. "Oh yes," she said. "Anna told me you would be coming. She is in the hall setting up. Go through that door and down the corridor. You cannot miss it." She pointed toward a doorway at the back of the space. Karl thanked her, and still holding Teresa's hand, made his way in the direction indicated. They walked down a short corridor, lined with photographs of community events, past a kitchen area where someone was washing dishes, and finally through double doors into a large hall. Karl stopped short when he saw the space. It was bigger than he expected, with a stage at one end and rows of folding chairs arranged in neat lines facing it. The stage was simple, just a raised platform, but to Karl it looked magnificent. Anna was on the stage, adjusting a microphone stand. She looked up when she heard them enter, and her face broke into a warm smile. "Karl," she called out, coming down the steps at the side of the stage. "You came. I am so glad." She approached them, her eyes kind, and then she noticed Teresa. "And this must be your daughter." Teresa, suddenly shy, pressed against Karl's side. Anna knelt down so she was at the girl's eye level. "Hello," she said gently. "What is your name?" Teresa whispered, "Teresa." Anna smiled. "That is a beautiful name. Would you like to see the stage, Teresa? Would you like to stand up there and see what it feels like?" Teresa's eyes widened. She looked up at Karl for permission. He nodded, and Anna took the girl's hand and led her toward the stage. Karl watched as his daughter climbed the steps and stood in the center of the platform, looking out at the empty chairs with wonder. Anna said something to her that Karl could not hear, and Teresa giggled. It was a sound that filled Karl's heart with warmth. Anna returned to where Karl stood, leaving Teresa to explore the stage. "She is delightful," Anna said. "You must be very proud." Karl nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "She is everything to me," he finally managed. Anna's expression softened. "I can see that," she said. "It is clear in everything about you. The love, the sacrifice. That is why I wanted to help." She gestured for Karl to sit in one of the chairs, and she sat beside him. "Let me tell you about the concert," she began. "We hold these events once a month during the winter. They are free and open to the community. People come for warmth, for connection, for something beautiful in the midst of hard times. We have had choirs, small bands, poets, storytellers. The audiences are usually between 50 and 100 people. They are generous and kind. They come wanting to be moved." She paused, watching Karl's face. "I would like you to perform at our concert next Saturday evening. You would have approximately 45 minutes to fill. You can play whatever you wish. I trust your judgment." Karl's mind reeled. Next Saturday. 1 week away. 45 minutes of music. 50 to 100 people. It was more than he had dared to hope for, and simultaneously more terrifying than anything he had imagined. He started, then stopped. "Are you certain? Are you certain I am good enough?" Anna reached over and took his hand. "Karl," she said firmly, "I would not have asked you if I did not believe in you. I have been organizing these concerts for 5 years. I have developed an instinct for talent. You have something special, raw and unpolished perhaps, but genuine. That authenticity is more valuable than technical perfection." She released his hand and sat back. "I understand if you are frightened," she continued. "Anyone would be. But I believe you can do this. More importantly, I believe you need to do this. Not for the money, though we will pay you 200 crowns for the performance, but for yourself, for your daughter. To prove to yourself that you are more than circumstances have made you." Karl looked at Teresa on the stage, twirling in a circle, her arms outstretched. He thought about Maria at home, waiting to hear the news. He thought about his grandfather, who had believed he could be something more than a factory worker. "I will do it," he said, the words coming out stronger than he felt. "I will play in your concert." Anna's face lit up with genuine joy. "Wonderful!" she exclaimed. "This is wonderful. Now, let us talk about practical matters. Can you come here a few times this week to practice on the stage, to get comfortable with the space and the acoustics?" Karl nodded. "Yes, I can come in the afternoons." Anna stood. "Perfect. Come Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3. I will make sure the hall is available and quiet. You can practice as long as you need." She called to Teresa. "Come down, dear one. Your father and I have finished talking." Teresa skipped down the stairs and ran to Karl. "Papa, can I come watch you practice?" she asked. Karl looked to Anna, who nodded. "Of course she can come," Anna said. "Children are always welcome here." She walked them to the door, chatting easily about the neighborhood, about the other programs the center offered. At the entrance, she paused. "Karl," she said, "thank you for saying yes. You are going to bring something beautiful to many people's lives. Never doubt that." Karl and Teresa walked home through the winter streets with a lightness in their steps that had not been there on the journey over. Teresa could not stop talking about the stage, about how big the room was, about how kind Anna seemed. Karl listened to her chatter, his own thoughts spinning with the reality of what he had agreed to do. A concert. A real concert in 1 week. The enormity of it pressed down on him. But there was also a strange exhilaration, a feeling he had not experienced in years. He was being given a chance, not just to earn money, though the 200 crowns would help tremendously, but to be something more than a man begging on a street corner. He was being given a chance to be an artist again. When they arrived home, Maria met them at the door, her face anxious and hopeful. Karl grinned at her, unable to contain himself. "It is real," he said. "The concert is real. Next Saturday. I am going to play." Maria's hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She pulled Karl into an embrace so tight he could barely breathe. "I knew it," she whispered against his shoulder. "I knew something good was coming. I felt it." Teresa danced around them, singing, "Papa is going to be a star. Papa is going to be a star." Karl laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "I do not know about being a star," he said, "but I am going to play music for people who want to listen. That is enough." That evening, the apartment filled with an energy that had been absent for years. They ate dinner together, and for once the conversation was not about bills or worries or how to stretch their meager resources. Instead, they talked about the concert, about what Karl would wear, about which songs he should play, about whether Maria and Teresa would be able to attend. Of course they would attend, Karl insisted. He needed them there. Their presence would give him courage. Maria's eyes shone with pride and love. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We will be in the front row," she promised, "watching every moment." After Teresa was in bed, Karl took out his violin and began going through his repertoire, deciding what to play. He needed enough music for 45 minutes. That meant perhaps 10 to 12 pieces, depending on their length. He wanted to start with something strong and memorable, something that would capture the audience's attention immediately. He needed pieces in the middle that showed range, that demonstrated both technical skill and emotional depth. And he needed to end with something powerful, something that would leave people moved and satisfied. It was like constructing a story, each piece a chapter, the whole creating a narrative arc. He practiced deep into the night, working through possibilities, discarding some, refining others. Maria sat with him, listening, offering her opinion when he asked for it. She had heard him play for years, had developed her own sense of which pieces worked best, which ones moved her most deeply. Together they assembled a program, writing it down on paper so Karel would not forget. Traditional folk melodies that his grandfather had taught him. A piece by Dvorak that he had learned as a young man. A mournful ballad about lost love. A lively dance tune that made feet want to move. Each piece chosen carefully, each one a part of his history, a thread in the fabric of his life. Monday afternoon arrived, and Karel made his way to the community center, his violin case under his arm. Teresa was in school, so he went alone. The young woman at the desk recognized him and waved him through to the hall. The space was empty and quiet. Karel stood for a moment just inside the doors, looking at the stage, feeling his stomach clench with nervousness. Then he squared his shoulders, walked down the aisle between the chairs, and climbed the steps to the platform. He set his violin case down, opened it carefully, and lifted out his instrument. The wood felt familiar and comforting in his hands. He positioned himself at the center of the stage, closed his eyes, and began to play. The acoustics of the hall were different from playing on the street. The sound bounced off the walls, filled the space, created echoes and harmonies he was not accustomed to. It was disorienting at first, but also thrilling. His music sounded bigger here, more resonant, more alive. He played through his opening piece, stumbled over a passage, stopped, started again. He was rusty. His timing was off. His confidence wavered. But he pushed through, determined not to let fear defeat him. For 2 hours he practiced, working through each piece on his program, adjusting his technique to the space, learning how to use the acoustics to his advantage. Anna appeared at some point, slipping quietly into the back of the hall. Karel did not notice her until he finished a piece and heard her applause. He looked up, startled, and saw her standing near the door. "Do not stop," she called out. "You are sounding wonderful." Karel felt his face flush with embarrassment and pleasure. "I am making so many mistakes," he said. "Do not worry about mistakes," Anna replied, walking down the aisle toward him. "Worry about feeling. Worry about connection. The mistakes will smooth out with practice." She climbed onto the stage and stood beside him. "May I offer some advice?" she asked. Karel nodded eagerly. "You are playing beautifully," Anna said, "but you are playing with your eyes closed almost the entire time. When you perform, you need to connect with your audience. Look at them. Let them see your face. Let them feel that you are playing for them, not just to them." Karel had never thought about this. On the street, he closed his eyes to block out the indifference around him, to lose himself in the music as an escape. But Anna was right. A concert was different. A concert required engagement, presence, connection. "Try it now," Anna suggested. "Play something and keep your eyes open. Look at the empty chairs and imagine them filled with people who care about what you are doing." Karel felt vulnerable at the thought, exposed, but he lifted his violin and began to play. He forced himself to keep his eyes open, to look out at the rows of empty seats. It felt strange and uncomfortable how he wanted to retreat into himself, into the safety of darkness behind closed lids. But he persisted, and gradually something shifted. He began to imagine the chairs filled with faces. He began to play not for himself, but for them, these imagined listeners. The music changed subtly, became more generous, more giving. When he finished, Anna was smiling broadly. "That is it," she said. "That is exactly it. You see the difference?" Karel did see it. He felt it. The music had opened up, had become a bridge rather than a wall. "Thank you," he said. "I would not have thought of that on my own." Anna patted his shoulder. "That is why we practice," she said. "Not just to perfect the notes, but to perfect the performance, to learn how to share ourselves with others. She left him to continue practicing, but her words stayed with him, reshaping how he approached each piece. Wednesday's practice session went better. Karol arrived more confident, more prepared. He worked through his entire program without stopping, timing himself to ensure he had enough material. 47 minutes. Close enough. He could adjust the tempo of certain pieces if needed. Teresa came with him this time, sitting in the front row, clapping enthusiastically after each piece. Her presence helped. Karol found himself playing to her, watching her reactions, feeding off her innocent joy. This was what performing was supposed to be, he realized. Not a desperate attempt to earn coins from strangers, but a gift offered and received, a moment of shared beauty. Between pieces, Teresa would call out requests. "Play the one about the dancing bear, Papa." "Play the sad one that makes Mama cry." Karol indulged her, and in doing so, he relaxed. His playing became more fluid, more natural. Anna came in toward the end of the session and watched for a while. When Karol finished, she approached the stage with a serious expression. "Karol," she said, "I need to tell you something. Word has gotten out about the concert. We have been receiving calls from people asking about the street violinist who is going to perform. The local newspaper wants to send someone to write a story." Karol's stomach dropped. A newspaper? That was too much attention, too much pressure. "I do not know if I am ready for that," he said, his voice tight. Anna held up a calming hand. "You do not have to speak to them if you do not want to," she said. "But I wanted you to know that people are interested. People have heard you playing on the street over the years. They remember you. They want to support you." She paused, studying his face. "This is bigger than just one concert, Karol. This could be the beginning of something. But only if you are ready. Only if you want it." Did he want it? Karol did not know. Part of him wanted to retreat, to keep his head down, to avoid the possibility of failure and public humiliation. But another part, a part that had been dormant for so long, whispered that maybe this was his moment. Maybe this was the chance he had been waiting for, without knowing he was waiting. He looked at Teresa, who was spinning in circles in the aisle, her arms outstretched, completely unself-conscious and free. He wanted to give her a better life. He wanted to give Maria a reason to smile without worry behind her eyes. He wanted to prove to himself that he was more than his circumstances. "I want it," he said finally, his voice stronger now. "I am scared, but I want it." Anna nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said. "Then we will make it happen. You practice, you prepare, and you trust yourself. Everything else will follow." She called Teresa over and asked if she would like to help put up posters advertising the concert. Teresa squealed with excitement. Anna pulled out a stack of colorful flyers from a bag she was carrying. They showed the date and time of the concert and featured a simple illustration of a violin. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Street musician Karol Nowak in concert." Seeing his name in print made it real in a way nothing else had. Friday's practice was Karol's last chance to rehearse before the concert. He arrived at the community center with his nerves jangling. This was it. After today, there would be no more preparation, only performance. He set up on the stage and ran through his program twice, from beginning to end, without stopping except for brief pauses between pieces. By the end of the second run through, his fingers ached and his shoulders were tight with tension. But the music was there. It was ready. He was as prepared as he would ever be. Anna appeared as he was packing up his violin. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Karol considered the question. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also alive. More alive than I have felt in years." Anna smiled. "That is exactly how you should feel," she said. "That terror, that aliveness, they are two sides of the same coin. They mean you care. They mean this matters." She handed him a small envelope. "This is an advance on your payment," she said. 100 crowns. I thought you might need it before the concert." Karol started to protest, but Anna cut him off. "Take it," she said firmly. "You have worked hard this week. You have earned it." Karol walked home as evening fell, the envelope heavy in his pocket. He thought about the past week, about how quickly his life had transformed. 7 days ago he had been a man without hope, standing on a street corner, invisible to the world. Now he was preparing for a concert, his name on posters around the neighborhood, people interested in his story. It was dizzying and surreal and wonderful and terrifying all at once. When he reached his building and began climbing the stairs, he felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Tomorrow night, he would stand on that stage. Tomorrow night, he would have to deliver. Tomorrow night, everything would change, one way or another. Saturday morning dawned grey and cold, the sky heavy, with clouds that threatened snow. Karol woke early, his body tense with anticipation. He had barely slept, tossing and turning through the night, his mind racing through his program over and over, imagining everything that could go wrong. A broken string, a memory lapse, an audience that sat in stony silence, unmoved by his playing. The fears circled like sharks, threatening to pull him under. But when Maria stirred beside him and reached for his hand in the darkness, he found an anchor. "Today is your day," she whispered. "No matter what happens. Today, you are a concert musician. No one can take that away from you." The hours until evening stretched endlessly. Karol tried to occupy himself with small tasks, but his concentration was scattered. He attempted to eat breakfast, but could manage only a few bites. His stomach was knotted too tightly to accept food. Teresa sensed his anxiety and stayed close, holding his hand, telling him stories to distract him. Maria moved through the apartment preparing for the evening, pressing Karol's clothes again, making sure Teresa's dress was clean, organizing their meager resources so they would have money for the tram to the community center. They could have walked, but Maria insisted they arrive fresh, not exhausted from the journey. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Maria opened it to find a young man with a camera around his neck. "I am looking for Karol Novak," he said. "I am with the city newspaper. Anna from the community center said I might find him here." Karol's heart sank. He had forgotten about the newspaper. He came to the door reluctantly, feeling exposed and unprepared. The journalist was friendly and earnest, perhaps in his mid-20s, with an eager expression. "I just want to ask you a few questions," he said. "About your story, about how you came to be playing on the street, about the concert tonight." Karol invited him in, though the apartment's poverty was immediately apparent. The young man did not seem to judge, simply found a seat at the kitchen table and pulled out a notepad. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "How did a musician end up on the street?" Karol hesitated, unsure how much to share, but Maria caught his eye and nodded encouragingly. So Karol told his story, about the factory closing, about the desperate search for work, about the decision to take his grandfather's violin and play for coins, about 3 years of standing on that corner, mostly ignored, slowly losing hope. And then about Anna, about the woman who stopped and listened, about the opportunity that had materialized from a single moment of kindness. The journalist scribbled notes furiously, occasionally asking follow-up questions. "Why do you think she helped you?" he asked. Carol thought about this carefully. "I think she saw something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself," he said slowly. "She saw that I was still a person, still someone with value, even though the world treated me as what, invisible. She reminded me that I mattered." The words caught in his throat. He had not articulated this truth before, even to himself, but saying it aloud made it real. Anna had given him more than money or an opportunity. She had given him back his dignity, his sense of self-worth. That was the real gift. The journalist asked to take some photographs. Carl posed awkwardly with his violin, feeling self-conscious. Maria and Teresa joined him for a family photo. The young man thanked them profusely, promised the article would run in tomorrow's edition, and left. After he was gone, Carl sat heavily in his chair, drained by the experience. "That was harder than I expected," he admitted. Maria came and stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders. "You did well," she said. "You told your truth. That takes courage." Carl leaned back into her touch, drawing strength from her presence. Without Maria, he would have given up long ago. She was his foundation, his constant, the reason he kept fighting. The afternoon crept toward evening. Carl tried to rest, but could not quiet his mind. He went through his program mentally, note by note, measure by measure, until the music blurred into a continuous stream. Finally, at 5, Maria declared it was time to prepare. She heated water for Carl to wash, laid out his clothes, made sure everything was ready. Carl dressed slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he buttoned his shirt. Maria helped him with his collar, smoothing the fabric, her touch tender. "You look handsome," she said softly. "You look like the man I fell in love with all those years ago." Teresa emerged from the bedroom in her best dress, her hair brushed and shining, her face glowing with excitement. She twirled for her parents. "Do I look pretty?" she asked. "You look beautiful," Carl said, his voice thick with emotion. This little girl, his daughter, had never complained about their poverty, had never blamed him for their struggles. She loved him unconditionally, believed in him absolutely. He wanted so badly to make her proud. At 6 they left the apartment, descending the stairs together, a family united in hope and trepidation. The evening was cold and clear, the earlier clouds having dissipated. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. They took the tram across the city, riding in silence. Other passengers glanced at them, noting their formal attire, perhaps wondering where they were headed. Carl held his violin case on his lap, his fingers gripping it tightly. Maria sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee, a steady presence. Teresa pressed her face to the window, watching the city lights slide past. When they arrived at their stop, they walked the final blocks to the community center. From a distance, Karel could see lights blazing in the windows, could see people gathered outside the entrance. His steps faltered. "There are so many people," he whispered. Maria squeezed his hand. "They came to hear you," she said. "They believe in you." Anna met them at the door, her face bright with excitement. "Carl," she exclaimed. "There you are. We have a full house. Every seat is taken. We had to bring in extra chairs." She ushered them inside, past clusters of people waiting in the lobby. Karl caught fragments of conversation. I used to see him on my way to work. I always thought he played beautifully. I am glad someone finally gave him a chance. The words washed over him, surreal and overwhelming. These people knew him, had noticed him, had been listening all along when he thought no one cared. Anna led them backstage, a small area behind the platform curtained off from the main hall. You have 15 minutes, she said. I will introduce you, give some background, and then you will come out and play. Remember what we practiced. Look at the audience. Connect with them. Trust yourself. She smiled warmly. You are going to be wonderful. I know it. She left to attend to final preparations, leaving Karl alone with Maria and Teresa. He paced in the small space, his nervous energy needing an outlet. Maria watched him with patient eyes. Do you want to be alone? She asked. Karl shook his head. No. I need you here. I need to know you are close. Through the curtain, Karl could hear the hall filling, voices rising in anticipation. He heard chairs scraping, people greeting each other, a general buzz of excitement. Anna's voice came through a speaker, asking everyone to find their seats. The concert was about to begin. Karl felt his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. His hands were sweating. His mouth was dry. This was it. The moment he had been preparing for all week. The moment that would define whether he had been right to hope or foolish to try. Maria took his face in her hands and looked directly into his eyes. I love you, she said simply. No matter what happens out there, I love you. Teresa loves you. You are already a success in our eyes. Teresa wrapped her arms around his waist. Play from your heart, Papa, she said, like Grandpa taught you. Karl bent down and kissed the top of her head. I will, he promised. For you, for Mama, for Grandpa, for everyone who believed in me. Anna appeared at the curtain. It is time, she said. Maria and Teresa, come with me. I have seats reserved for you in the front row. Maria kissed Karl one last time, a brief touch of lips that carried years of love and struggle and unwavering faith. Then she took Teresa's hand and followed Anna into the hall. Karl was alone. He lifted his violin from its case, checked the tuning, adjusted his bow. Through the curtain he could hear Anna speaking to the audience. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. We have something very special for you. Many of you know Karl Novak. You have seen him playing on the street, near the fountain in the town square. For 3 years he has stood there in all weather, sharing his music with a city that too often rushes past without stopping. But his music is beautiful. His music is true. And tonight, we are giving him the audience he deserves. Please welcome Karl Novak. Applause erupted, loud and sustained. Karl's cue. He took a deep breath, said a silent prayer to his grandfather's memory, and stepped through the curtain onto the stage. The lights were bright, momentarily blinding. As his eyes adjusted, he saw the hall packed with people, every seat filled, some standing along the walls. In the front row, Maria and Teresa beamed at him, Maria's eyes already glistening with tears. Karl walked to the center of the stage, positioned his violin, and looked out at the sea of faces. These were not strangers hurrying past. These were people who had chosen to be here, people who wanted to listen, people who saw him. He lifted his bow and began to play. The opening notes of his first piece soared into the hall, clear and strong and achingly beautiful. Karl played with his eyes open, looking at the audience as Anna had taught him. He saw people leaning forward in their seats. He saw expressions of wonder and recognition. He saw in that moment that his music mattered, that he mattered. The fear that had plagued him all day evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of rightness. This was where he was meant to be. This was what he was meant to do. He was not a beggar. He was not a failure. He was a musician, an artist, a man with a gift to share. He moved through his program, piece by piece, each one building on the last. His fingers found the notes effortlessly, muscle memory and years of practice taking over. He played the folk melodies his grandfather had taught him, and he saw older people in the audience nodding along, remembering their own childhoods. He played the Dvorak, and he saw people close their eyes, lost in the beauty. He played the mournful ballad, and he saw tears on faces. He played the lively dance tune, and he saw feet tapping, smiles spreading. His music was reaching them. His music was touching them. He was giving them something, and they were receiving it with open hearts. When he played his final piece, a hauntingly beautiful melody about hope and resilience, the hall was completely silent except for his violin. Every person was focused on him, absorbed in the music. Karel poured everything he had into that final piece, every ounce of pain and struggle and love and determination. He played for his father who had taught him about honest work. He played for his grandfather who had given him the gift of music. He played for Maria, who had stood beside him through everything. He played for Teresa, who deserved a better world. And he played for himself, for the man he had been and the man he was becoming. The final note hung in the air, pure and clear, and then faded into silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the applause began, thunderous and sustained. People rose to their feet, a standing ovation. Karel stood on the stage, overwhelmed, his vision blurring with tears. He had done it. He had actually done it. He looked at Maria and Teresa, both crying and clapping, their faces radiant with pride and joy. Anna was standing at the side of the stage, applauding with the others, her smile wide and triumphant. Karel bowed, once, twice, his body shaking with the intensity of the moment. The applause continued for what felt like an eternity. Karel stood on the stage, his violin hanging at his side, his chest heaving with emotion. He had never experienced anything like this outpouring of appreciation, this validation of his worth as an artist. Anna finally stepped onto the stage and raised her hands, asking for quiet. "Thank you, Karel," she said into the microphone. "That was extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, Karel Novak." Another round of applause erupted. Anna gestured for Karel to leave the stage, and he descended the steps on shaky legs, moving toward where Maria and Teresa waited. But before he could reach them, people began approaching him. Strangers with tears on their faces, thanking him for his music. An elderly woman clasped his hand and told him his playing reminded her of her late husband. A middle-aged man said he had heard Karel on the street dozens of times and was grateful to finally hear him properly. A young woman asked if he gave lessons. The attention was overwhelming. Karel tried to respond to each person, to thank them for coming, but his voice kept catching in his throat. He was not accustomed to being seen, let alone celebrated. Maria finally rescued him, gently steering people away, explaining that Karel needed a moment to collect himself. They found a quiet corner near the back of the hall. Teresa threw her arms around Karel's waist, squeezing tight. "Papa, you were amazing," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. Karel stroked her hair, his hand trembling. "Did you really think so?" he asked. "I thought you were perfect," Teresa said, pulling back to look up at him. "Everyone loved you. Did you hear them clapping?" Maria embraced them both, and for a long moment they stood together, a family island in the sea of activity around them. "I am so proud of you," Maria whispered. "So incredibly proud." Anna appeared with an older gentleman in an expensive-looking coat. The man had silver hair and a kind face lined with years. "Karl," Anna said, "this is Dr. Tomas Svoboda. He would like to speak with you." Karl wiped his eyes quickly and extended his hand. The doctor shook it firmly. "That was a remarkable performance," Dr. Svoboda said. "Truly remarkable. I have not been so moved by music in years." Karl mumbled his thanks, still feeling off balance from the evening's events. The doctor continued, "I wonder if we might speak privately for a few moments. I have a proposition that might interest you." Anna offered them the use of the small office at the front of the building. Karl glanced at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. He followed Dr. Svoboda through the crowd, people still stopping to congratulate him along the way. In the office, with the door closed, the noise of the hall became muted. Dr. Svoboda gestured for Karl to sit. "Let me be direct," the doctor said, settling into a chair across from Karl. "I am a retired physician, but I sit on the board of the City Cultural Foundation. We provide funding for arts programs and support for artists in need. I came tonight because Anna contacted me. She told me about you, about your circumstances, about your talent. After hearing you play, I believe you deserve our support." Karl's heart began to race. Support? What did that mean? Dr. Svoboda leaned forward, his expression earnest. "The Foundation has a program for emerging artists who show exceptional promise but lack resources. We provide monthly stipends, performance opportunities, even funding for further training if desired. I would like to nominate you for this program. If accepted, you would receive a monthly payment that would allow you to focus on your music rather than worrying about survival. You would also be connected with other musicians, with teachers, with venues. It could change your life." Karl stared at the doctor, unable to process what he was hearing. A monthly stipend? Performance opportunities? Training? It sounded too good to be true, like a fairy tale. "Why?" he finally managed to ask. "Why would you do this for me?" Dr. Svoboda smiled gently. "Because talent like yours should not be wasted standing on street corners," he said. "Because art matters. Because you matter. The Foundation exists precisely for situations like this, to lift up artists who have fallen through the cracks of society. You are not a charity case, Karl. You are an investment in beauty and culture and the human spirit." The doctor pulled out a card and handed it to Karl. "Think about it," he said. "Talk it over with your family. But if you are interested, call this number on Monday. We will set up a formal meeting, begin the application process. I cannot promise anything, but I am confident the board will approve. What I saw tonight was not just technical skill. It was heart. It was authenticity. That is rare and precious." He stood, indicating the conversation was over. Karl rose as well, his mind spinning. They shook hands again, and Dr. Svoboda left, disappearing back into the crowd. Karl remained in the office for a moment, trying to steady himself. Everything was happening too fast. A week ago he had been invisible. Tonight he had performed for a packed hall. And now this, a possibility so enormous he could barely conceive of it. A monthly stipend. No more standing on frozen corners. No more counting coins. The ability to actually practice his craft, to develop as a musician, to have a future beyond mere survival. It was dizzying. It was terrifying. It was everything he had stopped allowing himself to dream about. When he emerged from the office, the crowd had thinned somewhat, but many people still lingered, talking in small groups. Anna found him immediately. "Well?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Karol told her what Dr. Svoboda had proposed. Anna clapped her hands together in delight. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "I knew Thomas would see your potential. This is wonderful, Karol. This is exactly what should happen." Karol felt overwhelmed again. "I do not understand," he said. "How did this happen? A week ago I was nobody. Tonight I am being offered a stipend from a cultural foundation. It does not make sense." Anna took his hands in hers, her expression serious. "Karol, listen to me. This did not happen by accident. This happened because you have genuine talent and because you never gave up. Yes, I helped by giving you this opportunity. Yes, I called Thomas and told him to come tonight. But I could not have done any of that if you were not worthy. You earned this. Every bit of it." She paused, searching his face. "Do you remember what I told you that first night? That sometimes the smallest acts of recognition can save a person's life? I recognized your talent. Thomas recognized it tonight. Now the world is beginning to recognize it. You just have to accept that you deserve it." Deserve. That word lodged in Karol's chest, foreign and uncomfortable. He had spent 3 years believing he deserved nothing, that he was lucky to receive even scraps of attention and pity. Rewriting that narrative would take time. But maybe Anna was right. Maybe he did deserve this. Maybe his years of struggle, his refusal to completely surrender his dignity, his commitment to his art even when it seemed pointless, maybe all of that had earned him this chance. "I want to believe you," he said softly. "I am trying to believe you." Anna squeezed his hands. "That is all anyone can ask," she said. "Keep trying. Keep believing. The rest will follow." Maria and Teresa found them, and Anna excused herself to attend to other guests. Karol told Maria about Dr. Svoboda's offer. Her eyes widened with each detail. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, processing. "This is real?" she finally asked. "This is truly real?" Karol nodded. "I think so. He gave me a card. He wants me to call on Monday." Maria's eyes filled with tears again. She had cried more tonight than Karol had seen in months. "Then you will call," she said firmly. "You will call, and you will accept, and you will take this opportunity. Do you understand me?" Before Karol could respond, Anna appeared at the microphone on the stage. "Excuse me, everyone," she announced. "Before we close for the evening, I have one more thing to share. Many of you do not know this, but Karol Novak has been playing on our streets for 3 years, supporting his family through his music. Tonight you heard what we have been walking past all this time. But here is something even more remarkable." She paused for effect. Karol's daughter, Teresa, is 8 years old. She loves music as much as her father. "Teresa, would you come up here for a moment?" Teresa looked at her parents in surprise. Maria nodded encouragingly, and the little girl made her way to the stage. Anna knelt down beside her. "Teresa, your papa told me you sometimes sing along when he plays. Would you sing something for us now? With your papa?" Teresa's eyes went wide. She looked out at the audience, then back at her father. Karol felt a surge of protectiveness. He did not want his daughter exposed to potential failure or rejection, but he also saw the hope in her eyes, the desire to share something beautiful like he had. He climbed the steps to the stage and took Teresa's hand. "What should we play?" he whispered. "The lullaby," Teresa whispered back. "The one Grandpa used to play for you." Karl positioned his violin, and Teresa stood beside him. He began to play a slow, gentle melody, one his grandfather had played to help him sleep as a child. After a few measures, Teresa began to sing. Her voice was small but pure, carrying effortlessly through the hall. She sang in Czech, words about stars and dreams and love. The audience sat transfixed. Karl played, watching his daughter, feeling pride and love swell in his chest. This little girl, born into poverty, facing an uncertain future, standing here singing without fear. She was braver than he had ever been. When they finished, the applause was gentler, but no less heartfelt. People were openly crying now. Anna thanked them both and announced the concert was over. Slowly, people began to leave, but many stopped to thank Karl again, to compliment Teresa, to express their hope that they would see them perform again. One woman pressed money into Karl's hand. "For your daughter," she said. "Buy her something nice." A man gave him his business card. "I own a restaurant. I would love to have you play there on weekends. Good pay." The offers and kind words kept coming, each one another brick in the foundation of a new life. Finally, the hall emptied except for Anna, Karl, Maria, and Teresa. They helped Anna put away chairs and clean up. It felt right to help, to give back to the woman who had started all of this. When everything was in order, Anna hugged each of them. "This is just the beginning," she said to Karl. "You have opened a door tonight. Many doors. Walk through them. Do not be afraid." She handed him an envelope. "Your payment," she said. 200 crowns as promised. You earned every bit." Karl took the envelope, adding it to the money several audience members had given him. It was more cash than he had held in years. They left the community center and walked through the night streets, too energized to take the tram. The city looked different now, full of possibility rather than threat. Karl carried Teresa on his shoulders when she grew tired. Maria walked beside him, her hand in his, both of them silent, processing the magnitude of what had occurred. When they reached their building and climbed the 4 flights of stairs, their small apartment no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a launching pad, a place they would soon leave behind for something better. They put Teresa to bed, and she fell asleep immediately, exhausted by excitement. Karl and Maria sat together in their living room, the envelope of money on the table between them. "Call the doctor on Monday," Maria said again. "Promise me." Karl nodded. "I promise." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just breathing, just being. Then Maria spoke again. "You know what I realized tonight?" she asked. "What?" Karl replied. "That woman, Anna, when she stopped to listen to you that first night, she was not just helping you. She was helping all of us. She was helping Teresa. She was helping me. One act of kindness, and our entire world changed. I want to remember that. I want to pass that forward somehow. When we have enough, when we are stable, I want to help someone else the way she helped us." Karl felt something shift in his understanding. Anna had not just given him opportunity. She had given him a model for how to live, how to see others, how to recognize worth in unexpected places. That was the real lesson. That was the real gift. Not the money or the concert or the foundation stipend. but the reminder that every person has value, that attention and recognition can be as powerful as any material assistance. That kindness creates ripples that spread far beyond the original gesture. "We will," he promised Maria. "When the time comes, we will help someone else. We will pass it forward." Sunday morning arrived with gentle winter sunlight filtering through the apartment windows. Karl woke to find Maria already up, sitting at the kitchen table reading a newspaper. She looked up when she heard him stir, her face glowing with an expression he had not seen in years. "You need to see this," she said, sliding the paper across the table. There, on the Arts and Culture page, was a photograph of Karl with his violin. The headline read, "Street Musician Moves City to Tears." Karl's hands shook as he picked up the paper and began to read. The article was beautifully written, telling his story with compassion and respect. It described his years on the street, his struggle to support his family, his unwavering commitment to his music. It quoted several audience members from the previous night, their words full of praise. One woman was quoted saying, "I have rushed past him 100 times without really hearing him. Last night I understood what I had been missing. His music speaks to the soul." The journalist who had visited their apartment had captured not just facts but emotion, painting a portrait of a man who refused to surrender his dignity despite overwhelming circumstances. Karl read the article 3 times, each time finding it harder to believe the words were about him. The journalist had called his playing transcendent, had described him as a hidden treasure of the city, had suggested that his success story should inspire others to look more closely at the invisible people in their midst. "This will change everything," Maria said softly. "People will know who you are now. They will seek you out." The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Karl had spent years trying to be invisible, protecting himself from rejection by retreating into anonymity. Now he was being thrust into visibility, whether he was ready or not. Teresa woke and joined them at the table. They showed her the newspaper, and she squealed with delight, pointing at her father's picture. "Papa is famous," she announced. Karl laughed despite his nervousness. "I do not know about famous," he said, "but people know my name now. That is something." They spent the morning at home, enjoying a rare day of rest. Karl did not go to his street corner. It felt wrong somehow, after the concert, after the article. He was in limbo between his old life and whatever was coming next. The uncertainty was uncomfortable, but also strangely exhilarating. In the afternoon, Anna called. Someone at the community center had given her their number. "Have you seen the paper?" she asked excitedly. Karl confirmed that he had. "This is wonderful," Anna continued. "I have been receiving calls all morning. Other venues want to book you. The radio station wants to interview you. A music school asked if you would consider teaching." Karl felt overwhelmed by the litany of opportunities. "I do not know if I am ready for all of this," he admitted. Anna's voice became gentle. "You do not have to do everything at once. Take your time. Choose what feels right. But do not hide from this, Karl. This is your moment. Embrace it." After the call ended, Karl sat with the list Anna had dictated to him. 3 restaurants wanted him to play regularly. 2 other community centers requested concerts. The radio interview was scheduled for Wednesday, if he agreed. A private party wanted to hire him for a celebration. The music school was serious about the teaching position. Each opportunity represented income, stability, a chance to build something sustainable. But they also represented pressure, expectations, the possibility of failure on a larger stage. Karl had succeeded once. Could he do it again? Could he maintain this momentum more? Would he prove to be a flash in the pan, a momentary curiosity that quickly faded. Monday morning, Karl dressed carefully and walked to a quiet cafe near their apartment. He ordered a coffee he could now afford and sat at a corner table with Dr. Svoboda's card in front of him. He stared at the phone number for a long time, building up courage. Finally, he pulled out his mobile phone, an old device Maria had insisted they keep despite the expense, and dialed. A secretary answered and connected him to the doctor. "Karl." Dr. Svoboda's warm voice came through. "I was hoping you would call. Have you considered my offer?" "Yes," Karl said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm very interested. I want to apply for the Foundations program." Dr. Svoboda sounded pleased. "Excellent. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Say 3. We will begin the application process, discuss what the program entails, answer any questions you might have." Karl agreed and wrote down the address. After hanging up, he sat for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. He was taking steps toward a real future as a musician, not just surviving day to day, but actually building a career, a life. The thought was almost too large to contain. He spent the rest of the morning walking through the city, thinking, planning, imagining. He passed his old corner near the fountain and stopped, looking at the spot where he had stood for 3 years. It felt like looking at a different lifetime, a different person. That Karl had been broken and desperate. This Karl, the one standing here now, had hope, had options, had people believing in him. The transformation had happened so quickly, it barely seemed real. But it was real. The newspaper article was real. The concert had been real. The opportunities waiting for him were real. He just had to be brave enough to reach for them. At 3, Karl arrived at Dr. Svoboda's office in an elegant building in the old town. The office itself was tastefully decorated with artwork on the walls and comfortable furniture. The doctor greeted him warmly and offered tea. They sat in leather chairs by a window overlooking the street. "Let me explain how the foundation works," Dr. Svoboda began. He described a program that provided monthly stipends to artists for up to 2 years, renewable based on progress and need. Recipients were expected to continue developing their craft, to perform publicly when opportunities arose, and to eventually give back to the community through teaching or mentoring. The monthly amount the doctor mentioned was more than Karl had earned in his best months on the street. It was enough to pay rent, buy food, afford basic necessities, and even save a little. "There are conditions," Dr. Svoboda continued. "You would need to take lessons with a qualified instructor to refine your technique. You would need to perform at least once per month at venues we arrange. You would need to participate in community outreach, perhaps playing at schools or hospitals. Can you commit to these requirements?" Karl nodded vigorously. "Yes, absolutely. I want to improve. I want to perform. I want to give back. This is more than I ever hoped for." Dr. Svoboda smiled and pulled out an application form. They spent the next hour filling it out together, documenting Karl's background, his training with his grandfather, his years playing on the street, his recent concert. The doctor asked about his goals, his dreams for the future. Karl spoke haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. He wanted to be a better musician. He wanted to provide for his family. He wanted to inspire others the way his grandfather had inspired him. He wanted to prove that circumstances do not have to define destiny, that there is always a chance for redemption and renewal. When the application was complete, Dr. Svoboda explained the next steps. The foundation board would review it at their meeting on Friday. Given his personal recommendation and Karl's obvious talent, approval was virtually certain. If approved, the first payment would be made within a week. In the meantime, the doctor said, you should continue accepting the performance opportunities that are coming your way. Build your reputation. Make connections. The foundation wants to support artists who are actively engaged in their work, not passive recipients of charity. Karl assured him that he understood and would do exactly that. Leaving the doctor's office, Karl felt lighter than he had in years. The pieces were falling into place. The foundation would provide financial stability. The performance opportunities would provide experience and exposure. The teaching position at the music school would allow him to share his knowledge. He was building a life, a real life, not just surviving, but thriving. He could hardly believe it. He walked through the city streets with his head high, noticing beauty he had been too weary to see before. The architecture, the way light fell across old buildings, the sound of church bells in the distance. The world was opening up to him in ways both literal and metaphorical. That evening, Karl told Maria everything. They sat together at their kitchen table, the same table where they had shared so many worried conversations about bills and survival. And this time they talked about possibilities instead of problems. Maria cried again, happy tears that she did not try to hide. I always knew you were special, she said. I always knew you had something important to offer the world. I just did not know how to help you reach it. Anna did. She saw it, and she helped. Now everything is changing. Karl took her hands across the table. We are going to be okay, he said. For the first time in years, we are going to be truly okay. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in a whirlwind of activity. Karl accepted the teaching position at the music school, starting with just a few students to begin. He agreed to play at one of the restaurants on Friday and Saturday evenings. He scheduled his radio interview for Wednesday afternoon. Each commitment felt like another step up a ladder, another move away from the abyss of poverty and despair. The radio interview was nerve-wracking, but ultimately successful. The host was kind and interested, asking about his background, his music, his hopes. Karl spoke honestly, from the heart, and listeners called in to express their support and admiration. Thursday afternoon, Anna called again. Have something to ask you, she said. The city is organizing a winter festival next month. They want to feature local artists. They have asked specifically for you to perform at the opening ceremony. It would be in the main square, outdoors with hundreds of people attending. Possibly thousands. It is a significant opportunity, but also a major undertaking. What do you think? Karl's first instinct was to say no, that he was not ready for something so large and public. But then he remembered Dr. Svoboda's words about being actively engaged, about building his reputation. Yes, he heard himself say, I will do it. After hanging up, Karl sat in stunned silence. The main square, the opening ceremony of the winter festival. This was not a small community center performance. This was a major public event. The pressure would be enormous. The visibility would be intense. But it was also exactly the kind of opportunity that could establish him as a serious artist in the city's cultural landscape. He thought about his grandfather, about all those hours of patient instruction. He thought about Maria's unwavering support. He thought about Teresa's innocent faith in him. He thought about Anna's recognition that first evening. All of these people had believed in him when he could not believe in himself. Now, he had to prove them right. Friday morning arrived, and with it news from Dr. Svoboda. The The foundation board had met and unanimously approved Karl's application. The first monthly payment would be deposited into his account on Monday. Karl received the news while sitting at the kitchen table with Maria and Teresa. He simply held the phone for a moment after the call ended, unable to speak. Maria looked at him with concern. "What is it?" she asked. "What happened?" Karl found his voice. "They approved it. The foundation approved my application. We are going to receive a monthly stipend. Starting Monday. We are going to be financially stable." The three of them sat in silence, letting the magnitude of this news settle over them. No more counting coins. No more skipped meals. No more terror every time an unexpected bill arrived. They would have enough. Not wealth, not luxury, but enough. Maria began to cry softly, her shoulders shaking with released tension. Karl moved to her side and held her as she wept. 3 years of accumulated fear and stress poured out of her. Teresa climbed into both their laps, and they sat together, a family who had survived the worst and emerged into something better. "We made it," Maria whispered. "We actually made it." That evening, Karl played his first paid restaurant performance. The venue was a small but elegant establishment in the old town, popular with locals and tourists alike. The owner had set up a small area near the window where Karl could play without disrupting diners. It was different from concert performance, more background ambiance, but Karl adapted. He played softer pieces, melodies that enhanced rather than dominated the atmosphere. Diners smiled at him. Some requested specific songs. The owner was delighted and immediately booked him for the following weekend. When Karl returned home that night with payment in his pocket, he felt proud. This was honest work. This was using his gift to earn his living. This was dignity. Saturday brought another restaurant performance, this time at a larger venue with a more prominent performance area. Karl was more confident now, more comfortable with this format. He engaged with the audience between pieces, thanking them for listening, sharing brief stories about the songs. People responded warmly, some leaving generous tips in addition to his agreed payment. One elderly couple approached him during a break to tell him they had been at the community center concert. "You brought back memories of our youth," the woman said. "The music our parents played, the songs we danced to when we first fell in love. Thank you for keeping those traditions alive." Sunday was a day of rest, but also reflection. Karl sat with his violin in the quiet apartment, playing softly, thinking about the journey of the past 2 weeks. How had his life changed so completely in such a short time? One woman stopping to listen. One conversation. One opportunity. And from that seed, an entire forest had grown. Connections leading to more connections. Success building on success. He understood now what Anna had meant about recognition. Being seen, truly seen, had unlocked something in him that had been dormant. Confidence, purpose, hope. These things had always been there, buried beneath layers of rejection and hardship. Anna had simply helped him excavate them. Monday morning, Karl checked his bank account and saw the foundation payment had arrived exactly as promised. He stared at the number on the screen, still not quite believing it was real. He showed Maria, and they spent the morning doing something they had not done in years, making plans that extended beyond the immediate crisis. They could afford to move to a better apartment, one with heating that worked properly. They could buy Teresa new clothes for school. They could save money for her future. They could occasionally enjoy small luxuries without guilt. The relief was overwhelming. That afternoon, Karl went to the music school for his first teaching session. He had 3 students, all adults who wanted to learn violin as a hobby. He found teaching came naturally to him, perhaps because his grandfather had been such a patient teacher. He showed them proper bow hold, finger placement, basic scales. He encouraged them when they struggled, praised them when they succeeded. At the end of the hour, all 3 students thanked him and scheduled their next lessons. The school director told him they had already received inquiries from others wanting to study with him. His reputation was spreading. He was becoming known not just as a street musician who got lucky, but as a skilled artist and teacher. The weeks leading up to the Winter Festival passed in a blur of activity and preparation. Karl established a rhythm to his new life, teaching at the music school 3 afternoons per week, performing at restaurants on Friday and Saturday evenings, practicing intensively every morning. He also began lessons with a professional instructor the foundation had connected him with, a woman named Helena, who had played with the city orchestra for 30 years. Helena was demanding but patient, pushing Karl to refine his technique, to understand music theory more deeply, to explore pieces beyond his comfort zone. Under her guidance, his playing evolved, gaining polish and sophistication while retaining the emotional authenticity that made it special. Maria found work at a better-paying seamstress shop, one that valued her skill and treated her with respect. With both of them earning steady income, they were able to move to a new apartment in a better neighborhood. It was still modest, but clean and warm, with 2 bedrooms, so Teresa could have her own space. The girl blossomed in their new circumstances, her grades improving at school, her confidence growing. She began taking piano lessons, showing the same natural musicality her father possessed. Karl would often hear her practicing in her room, her small fingers finding melodies, and his heart would swell with pride and gratitude. But as the date of the Winter Festival approached, Karl's anxiety grew. This performance would be unlike anything he had done before. Outdoors in the main square, potentially thousands of people, opening ceremony for a major city event, media coverage. The stakes were enormous. Success could cement his reputation as a serious artist. Failure would be public and humiliating. He practiced obsessively, running through his program until his fingers ached and his shoulders burned with tension. Helena noticed his stress and tried to counsel him. "You are playing too much," she said during one lesson. "You are going to exhaust yourself. The music must come from a place of joy, not fear." But Karl could not help the fear. He remembered too well what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored. He had worked so hard to climb out of invisibility, and the thought of falling back into it terrified him. What if the community center concert had been a fluke? What if that newspaper article had raised expectations too high? What if he proved unable to deliver on a larger stage? The questions circled endlessly, robbing him of sleep, stealing his appetite. Maria watched with concern as he drove himself harder and harder, but she did not know how to ease his burden. This was something he had to work through himself. 2 weeks before the festival, Anna invited Karl to the community center to discuss logistics. They sat in the hall where he had performed that first concert, now quiet and empty. "The festival organizers have specific requirements," Anna explained, pulling out a folder of documents. "You will play for 40 minutes at 7 in the evening. The square will be set up with a stage and sound system. There will be lights, cameras, a professional production crew. You will have a sound check in the afternoon. Everything will be coordinated and professional." She looked at Karl carefully. "How are you feeling about it?" Karl wanted to say he was fine, confident, ready. But Anna had been honest with him from the beginning, and he owed her the same honesty. "I am terrified," he admitted. "What if I am not good enough? What if people are disappointed?" Anna reached across the table and took his hand. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You are good enough. You have already proven that. The community center concert, the restaurant performances, your students, all of these people have experienced your talent and responded to it. You are not the same man who stood on that street corner. You have grown, you have trained, you have prepared. Trust yourself." "I am trying," Karl said quietly, "but the doubt is always there, whispering that I do not deserve this, that it will all be taken away." Anna squeezed his hand. "That doubt is normal. Every artist feels it. But you cannot let it control you. The doubt is just fear of being vulnerable, fear of being seen and judged. The antidote to that fear is not confidence, but courage. Courage to be vulnerable anyway. Courage to be seen anyway. Courage to share your gift, even when you are afraid." Her words resonated with something deep in Karl's chest. She was right. He would never be without doubt. But he could choose courage over surrender. The festival organizers requested a meeting to finalize details. Karl, Maria, and Anna met them at the City Cultural Affairs Office, an impressive building filled with officials and administrators. The festival director, a brisk, efficient woman named Petra, outlined the program for the opening ceremony. There would be speeches by the mayor and other dignitaries, a children's choir, a dance performance, and then Karl's violin concert. "You are the centerpiece," Petra explained, "the emotional heart of the ceremony. We want you to move people, to remind them why these winter festivals matter, why community and art and beauty matter." The pressure of this expectation sat heavy on Karl's shoulders. They discussed the program Karl would play. Petra wanted a mix of traditional and classical, pieces that would appeal to a broad audience. Karl showed her his proposed set list. She approved most selections, but suggested a few changes, wanting one more upbeat piece to end on an energizing note. Karl agreed to modify his program, though it meant learning a new piece quickly. Helena helped him with the addition, a lively folk dance that showcased technical skill while remaining accessible. It was challenging, but Karl threw himself into mastering it, practicing until the notes flowed effortlessly from his fingers. 1 week before the festival, the newspaper ran a follow-up article about Karl, profiling his journey from street musician to featured artist at the Winter Festival. The journalist interviewed Maria and Teresa, capturing their perspective on the family's transformation. Maria spoke beautifully about Anna's kindness and about the power of recognition to change lives. Teresa told the reporter that her papa was the best musician in the world. The article was accompanied by new photographs showing Karl with his family in their new apartment, a stark contrast to the earlier images of poverty and struggle. The story resonated with readers, many of whom wrote letters to the editor expressing their support and excitement for the festival performance. The attention was gratifying, but also added to Karl's stress. Now, not only would he be performing for thousands in the square, but he would be doing so with the weight of his entire story behind him. He was not just a musician, but a symbol, a narrative of redemption and possibility. People would come with expectations, wanting to be inspired, wanting their faith in human goodness confirmed. It was too much weight for one performance to carry. But Karl had no choice except to bear it. He had said yes. He had committed. He would have to find a way to deliver. 3 days before the festival, Karl visited the main square to see the setup in progress. Workers were constructing a stage, stringing lights, testing sound equipment. The square was large, capable of holding several thousand people. Karl stood in the center, looking around, trying to imagine it filled with faces all turned toward him. The scale was intimidating. This was so far beyond anything he had experienced. The community center concert had felt intimate, despite the full house. This would be massive, impersonal, overwhelming. He felt his resolve waver. Maybe he should pull out. Maybe he should claim illness, make excuses, retreat to safety. But then he thought about everyone who had supported him. Anna, who had believed in him first. Dr. Svoboda, who had championed him to the foundation. Helena, who had patiently refined his skill. Maria, who had never stopped loving him through the worst times. Teresa, who looked at him with such pride. All these people had invested in him, had given him pieces of themselves to help him succeed. He could not let them down. He could not let himself down. He had come too far to surrender now to fear. He squared his shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked back home to practice some more. The day before the festival, Karl woke with his stomach in knots. He tried to practice, but his hands were shaking too badly. Helena came to the apartment for a final lesson and found him in a state of near panic. She made him put down his violin and sit. "Tell me what you are feeling," she said. Karl poured out his fears, his doubts, his terror of public failure. Helena listened without interruption, her face calm and understanding. When he finished, she spoke quietly but firmly. "Karl, I have been teaching music for 40 years. I have seen hundreds of students. Most were technically proficient, but emotionally empty. Their playing was correct, but soulless. You are the opposite. Your technique is still developing, but your soul is fully present in every note. That is rare and precious. That is what people will respond to." She made him pick up his violin again. "Play for me," she said. "Not your festival program. Play the first piece you ever learned from your grandfather. Play it like you are 8 years old again, playing just for the joy of it." Karl closed his eyes and found the melody in his memory, a simple folk tune his grandfather had taught him with infinite patience. He played it slowly, letting himself remember the feeling of being a child, the wonder of creating sound, the pure, uncomplicated love of music. As he played, something loosened in his chest. The fear receded. The joy returned. When he finished, Helena was smiling. "That is what you must take to the stage tomorrow," she said. "Not the fear, not the pressure. Just that love, just that joy." That evening, the family ate dinner together in their warm apartment. They did not talk about the festival. Instead, they talked about ordinary things, about Teresa's school project, about a dress Maria was making, about a funny incident at one of Karl's restaurant performances. It was deliberately normal, deliberately calm, a buffer against tomorrow's storm. After Teresa was in bed, Karl and Maria sat together on their small sofa. Maria leaned against his shoulder. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said softly, "I want you to know that you have already succeeded. You brought us from desperation to stability. You proved that dignity and persistence matter. You showed Teresa that dreams are possible, even if tomorrow does not go perfectly. You are already a success in every way that truly matters." Karl held her close, drawing strength from her certainty. She was right. He had already accomplished so much. The festival performance was important, but it was not everything. It was one moment in a larger journey, one step in a continuing story. If he failed, he would try again. If he succeeded, he would keep working to deserve that success. Either way, he would keep moving forward. He would keep playing. He would keep sharing his gift, because that was who he was now. Not a desperate man on a street corner, but an artist with purpose and value. That truth could not be taken away by one performance, good or bad. The morning of the festival arrived cold and clear. Karl woke before dawn, unable to sleep any longer. He lay in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the apartment, Maria's breathing beside him, the distant hum of the city waking up. Today was the day. Everything he had worked for, everything he had overcome, would culminate in this one performance. He rose quietly and made his way to the living room. His violin sat on the table where he had left it the night before. He picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, its comforting presence. This instrument had been with him through everything. It had been his companion in poverty, his tool for survival, his voice when he had no other. Today it would be his partner in what could be the most important performance of his life. He did not play yet. Instead, he simply held the violin, closing his eyes, centering himself. He thought about his grandfather, imagined the old man sitting beside him, felt his presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. What would his grandfather say right now? Probably something simple and profound. Play from your heart. Trust the music. Remember why you started. Karl took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He could do this. He had to do this. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had believed in him. He thought about Anna, about that first evening when she had stopped to listen. If she had not taken that chance, none of this would be happening. One act of recognition had set everything in motion. Today, he would honor that act by giving the best performance he was capable of. Maria found him in the living room an hour later, still sitting with his violin. She made breakfast, though Karl could barely eat. His stomach was too tight with nerves. Teresa bounced around the apartment, excited beyond measure. She had a new dress for the occasion, bought with money they could now afford to spend. She would sit in the front row with Maria, watching her father perform on the biggest stage of his life. The girl could not stop talking about it, about how proud she was, about how everyone at school would see her papa on stage. Her innocent excitement helped ease some of Karl's tension. This was what it was all about. Making his daughter proud. Showing her that perseverance and courage could change everything. The afternoon arrived too quickly. Karl needed to be at the square by 4 for sound check. He dressed carefully in the suit the foundation had helped him purchase, a simple black ensemble that made him look professional and dignified. Maria fussed over his collar, his hair, checking and rechecking every detail. "You look wonderful," she said finally, stepping back to admire him. "You look like an artist." Karl gazed at himself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the man staring back. Gone was the desperate street musician in worn clothes. In his place stood someone confident and prepared, someone who belonged on a stage. It was remarkable how much external circumstances could change a person's appearance, and yet the person inside was still fundamentally the same. He was still Karl, still the boy who had learned violin from his grandfather, still the man who loved his family with desperate intensity. They left the apartment together, taking a taxi to the square. It was an extravagance, but Maria insisted they arrive in style, without rushing or worry. As they approached the square, Karl could see that preparations were complete. The stage stood impressive and professional, lights already glowing in the late afternoon dimness. Sound equipment was set up. Cameras were positioned at multiple angles. Workers moved about making final adjustments. It looked like a real concert venue, not just a temporary outdoor setup. Petra, the festival director, spotted them and hurried over. "Karl, perfect timing. Let me show you where everything is." She led him backstage, showed him where he would wait before his performance, where he would enter, what the cues would be. The sound check was thorough and professional. Karl stood on the stage looking out at the empty square, testing the microphones, playing a few passages while technicians adjusted levels. The sound system was excellent, amplifying his violin beautifully without distortion. He could hear every nuance, every subtle shading. This was so different from playing on the street or even in the community center hall. This was a professional production with resources and expertise behind it. When the sound check was complete, Petra thanked him and told him to rest, to stay warm, to be ready to perform at 7. Karl retreated backstage, where a small heated tent had been set up for performers. He sat on a folding chair, his violin case beside him, and tried to calm his racing heart. Maria and Teresa found him there. They were not supposed to be backstage, but Petra had made an exception, understanding that Karl needed his family close. Maria sat beside him while Teresa explored the tent, touching everything, marveling at the professional setup. "How are you feeling?" Maria asked. Karl considered the question. "Scared," he admitted, "but also ready. I think. I do not know. Ask me again after it is over." Maria smiled and kissed his cheek. "You are going to be magnificent," she said with absolute certainty. "I have no doubts at all." Her faith bolstered him. If she could be so sure, maybe he could borrow some of that certainty for himself. As 6:30 approached, the square began to fill with people. Karl could hear them through the tent walls, voices rising in anticipation, the sounds of a gathering crowd. He peeked through a gap in the fabric and saw hundreds already present, with more arriving every moment. Families with children, elderly couples, young people in groups, all converging on the square to celebrate the winter festival. They spread across the open space, some standing near the stage, others farther back, a sea of faces and bodies extending in every direction. Karl's breath caught in his throat. There were so many. More than he had imagined, more than he had prepared himself for. The reality of what he was about to do crashed over him like a wave. Anna appeared backstage, somehow knowing he would need her. She embraced him warmly. "Are you ready?" she asked. Karl shook his head. "I do not think I will ever be ready for something like this." Anna laughed gently. "None of us are ever truly ready for the moments that define our lives. We simply rise to meet them as best we can. You will be fine, Karl. More than fine. You will be extraordinary." She pressed something into his hand. A small stone, smooth and worn. "My grandmother gave me this," she said. "She told me to hold it whenever I needed to remember my own strength. Carry it with you today. Let it remind you that you are not alone." Karl closed his fingers around the stone, feeling its solid weight, its warmth from Anna's hand. "Thank you," he managed to say, "for everything, for seeing me, for believing in me, for changing my life." Anna's eyes glistened with tears. "You changed your own life, Karl. I simply opened a door. You were the one brave enough to walk through it." She hugged him once more and then left, needing to take her seat before the ceremony began. Karl stood holding the stone, feeling connected to something larger than himself, to Anna and her grandmother, to his own grandfather, to all the people throughout history who had struggled and persevered and found beauty in difficulty. He was part of a long chain of human resilience. That thought gave him courage. At 6:50, a production assistant came to the tent. 10 minutes, Mr. Novak." Maria kissed Karl one last time. "We will be in the front row," she reminded him, "watching every moment, playing for us like you always do." She took Teresa's hand and they left, heading to their reserved seats. Karl was alone now, except for the production staff moving around him. He opened his violin case and lifted out his instrument. The wood gleamed in the tent's artificial light. He checked the tuning, adjusted his bow, went through his pre-performance ritual. These familiar actions calmed him, centering his focus on the music rather than the fear. The ceremony began at 7 precisely. Karl could hear the mayor's voice over the speakers, welcoming everyone to the winter festival, talking about community and tradition and the importance of coming together during the dark months. Then the children's choir performed, their voices clear and sweet, singing carols that made the audience smile. The dance troupe came next, a brief, energetic performance that drew applause and cheers. Karl listened to it all from backstage, his nervousness building with each passing moment. Soon it would be his turn. Soon he would have to walk out onto that stage and perform for thousands of people. The thought made his hands shake. He gripped the stone Anna had given him, drawing strength from it. Petra appeared beside him. "You are next, Karl. Are you ready?" He wanted to say no, that he would never be ready, that he had made a terrible mistake agreeing to this, but instead he found himself nodding. "Yes," he heard himself say. "I am ready." Petra smiled and led him to the stage entrance. Through the curtain he could hear Anna's voice over the speakers, introducing him. She was telling his story, about the years on the street, about the concert at the community center, about the transformation that had brought him to this moment. "Please welcome," she concluded, her voice warm with pride, "Karl Novak." The applause began before he even appeared, rolling across the square like thunder. Karl took a deep breath, clutched his violin, and stepped through the curtain onto the stage. The lights were bright, momentarily blinding. As his eyes adjusted, he saw the crowd stretching before him, thousands of faces turned toward him, hands clapping, bodies pressed together in the cold evening air. It was overwhelming, terrifying, magnificent. He walked to the center of the stage where a microphone stood waiting. The applause continued, wave after wave of it. People were cheering. Someone shouted his name. Karl stood there absorbing it, letting it wash over him, this affirmation of his worth, this recognition of his journey. Finally, the applause faded. The square fell silent, thousands of people waiting expectantly. Karl lifted his violin to his shoulder, positioned his bow, and looked out at the audience. He found Maria and Teresa in the front row, both of them beaming at him with love and pride. He found Anna standing to the side of the stage, her hands clasped together, her expression hopeful and encouraging. He found Dr. Svoboda in the third row, nodding at him with quiet confidence. All these people who had helped him, who had believed in him, were here watching. He could not let them down. But more importantly, he could not let himself down. This was his moment, his chance to prove that he was more than his circumstances, more than his struggles, more than the man who had once stood invisible on a street corner. Karl closed his eyes for just a moment, centering himself, finding that place inside where the music lived. Then he opened his eyes, looked directly at the audience, and began to play. The first notes soared into the cold night air, pure and clear, and heart-breakingly beautiful. The sound system carried his music across the square, into every corner, reaching every listener. Karl played the opening piece he had chosen, a traditional melody his grandfather had loved, a song about winter and hardship and the promise of spring. He played it with everything he had, pouring his heart into every note, every phrase, every subtle inflection. He played it for his grandfather who had taught him, for his father who had worked with dignity, for Maria who had never stopped believing, for Teresa who deserved a better world, for Anna who had seen him when no one else would, for every person who had ever felt invisible, ever struggled, ever wondered if they mattered. The music filled the square, transforming the cold evening into something magical. People in the audience stood transfixed, some closing their eyes to better absorb the sound, others watching Karl's fingers dance across the strings, all of them connected by this shared moment of beauty. When the first piece ended, there was a beat of silence, and then applause erupted again, enthusiastic and genuine. Karl felt something release in his chest. It was working. They were listening. They were moved. He was reaching them. He transitioned into the second piece, a more complex classical work that showcased his technical improvement under Helena's tutelage. The music was intricate and demanding, but Karl navigated it confidently, his fingers sure, his bow arm fluid and controlled. This was what months of practice and proper instruction could achieve. This was the difference between survival playing and artistry. Karl moved through his program with growing confidence. Each piece flowed into the next, creating a narrative arc that carried the audience on an emotional journey. He played songs of sorrow and songs of joy, melodies of longing and melodies of a triumph. Between pieces, he spoke briefly to the crowd, thanking them for coming, sharing small stories about the music, connecting with them as Anna had taught him. His voice was steady now, the fear transformed into focus. He was in the zone, that magical state where technique disappears and only the music remains. Everything else fell away, the cold, the lights, the cameras, the size of the crowd. All that existed was the violin in his hands and the notes flowing from it. For his final piece, Karl had chosen the lively folk dance that Petra had requested, a challenging work that would end the performance on an energizing high note. But as he stood there preparing to play it, he made a sudden decision. He set down his bow and spoke into the microphone. "I was going to play something upbeat to finish," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "But I want to do something different, something more personal. 3 months ago, I was standing on a street corner, not far from here, playing my violin for coins, feeling invisible and forgotten. Then a woman stopped. She listened. She saw me. And she changed everything." He gestured to where Anna stood at the side of the stage. "Anna, would you join me?" Anna looked startled, but came onto the stage. Karl continued speaking. "Anna reminded me that every person has value, that recognition matters, that small acts of kindness can transform lives. Tonight I want to play a piece that represents that transformation, and I want my daughter to join me." He looked at Maria in the front row. "Teresa, come up here." The girl hesitated, overwhelmed, but Maria urged her forward. Teresa climbed the steps to the stage, her eyes wide, her small body trembling with excitement and nervousness. Karl knelt down beside her. "Remember the lullaby we sang at the community center?" he asked softly. Teresa nodded. "Let us sing it again, for all these people, to show them what hope looks like. Karl stood and positioned his violin. Anna put her hand on Teresa's shoulder, steadying her. Karl began to play the gentle melody, the lullaby his grandfather had played for him as a child. After a few measures, Teresa began to sing, her voice small at first, but growing stronger. She sang about stars and dreams and love, her pure, clear tones rising into the night sky. The crowd fell completely silent, transfixed by this little girl singing with such innocent beauty. Karl played softly behind her, supporting her, letting her voice be the focus. Tears streamed down his face as he played, but he did not stop. This was the culmination of everything. His daughter, unafraid, sharing her gift with the world. She had never known the desperation he had experienced. She would grow up with opportunities and confidence. She would never have to stand on a corner hoping for coins. That was his legacy. That was what this journey had been for. When the song ended, there was a long moment of absolute silence. Then the applause began, different this time. Slower, deeper, more emotional. People were crying openly. Strangers embraced. The simple beauty of what they had just witnessed had touched something profound in the collective heart of the crowd. Teresa looked up at her father with wonder. Karl embraced her, lifting her in his arms. Anna stood beside them, tears running down her face. The three of them stood together on that stage, representing the power of kindness, the possibility of transformation, the enduring strength of the human spirit. The applause continued for minutes, people unwilling to let the moment end, wanting to hold on to the feeling it had created. Finally, Karl set Teresa down and spoke one last time into the microphone. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for giving me and my family a chance at a better life. I will never forget this moment. I will never forget your generosity. And I promise to pass forward the kindness that was shown to me. Thank you." He bowed deeply, Teresa and Anna beside him, and then they left the stage together. The applause followed them, sustained and heartfelt, a community celebrating one of its own, who had risen from struggle to triumph. Backstage, Karl was surrounded immediately by people wanting to congratulate him, to book him for future performances, to tell him how moved they were. Media reporters pushed forward with microphones and cameras, asking for interviews. Petra hugged him enthusiastically, declaring the performance a triumph that would be remembered for years. Through it all, Karl kept Teresa close, one hand on her shoulder, anchoring himself to what truly mattered. Maria found her way through the crowd, and the family embraced, holding each other as chaos swirled around them. They had done it. They had actually done it. The journey that had begun on a frozen street corner had brought them to this moment of celebration and recognition. Dr. Svoboda appeared with several other Foundation board members. "Karl," he said, his face glowing with pride. "That was extraordinary. The board would like to extend your Foundation support for an additional 2 years beyond the initial period. We also want to discuss creating a scholarship in your name for young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. You have become exactly the kind of success story we hoped for. Someone who not only received help, but will now help others." Karl felt overwhelmed by the offer. A scholarship in his name, the idea that he could help other struggling musicians find their path. It was more than he had ever imagined possible. The evening stretched on, filled with conversations and congratulations and plans for the future. Multiple venues wanted to book Karl for performances. The music school asked if he would expand his teaching schedule. A recording studio offered to produce an album of traditional folk music. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell his story. The opportunities kept coming, each one opening new doors, new possibilities. But through it all, Karl remained grounded, remembering where he had come from, remembering the man who had stood invisible on that corner just months before. He would not take any of this for granted. He would not forget the struggle. It had made him who he was. Eventually, the festival concluded, and the crowd began to disperse. Karl and his family made their way home through streets now quieter, the excitement of the evening giving way to exhaustion and reflection. In the taxi, Teresa fell asleep against her mother's shoulder. Karl watched the city lights slide past the window, thinking about everything that had happened. Less than 3 months had passed since Anna stopped to listen to him play. Less than 3 months, and his entire world had transformed. It seemed impossible, miraculous, like something from a story rather than real life. But it was real. He could feel the soreness in his fingers from playing, could see his sleeping daughter in her new dress, could hold Maria's hand and know that they were safe, stable, secure. Back in their apartment, they tucked Teresa into her own bed in her own room, a luxury they had not had in the old place. She stirred as they covered her with blankets. "Papa," she mumbled sleepily. "Everyone loved you." Karl kissed her forehead. "Everyone loved you too, my darling. You were so brave." Teresa smiled and drifted back to sleep. Karl and Maria stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, their hearts full. Then they retreated to their own room, finally alone after the intensity of the evening. They undressed in comfortable silence and lay together in the darkness, Maria's head on Karl's chest, his arm around her shoulders. "I keep waiting to wake up," Karl said quietly. "I keep thinking this cannot be real." Maria's voice was soft in the darkness. "It is real. It is our life now. We earned it. We survived long enough to reach it." Karl thought about her words. They had survived. That was the truth of it. They had endured poverty and desperation and the daily grind of just trying to make it through. They had not given up even when giving up would have been easier. They had held on to each other, held on to love, held on to the smallest shreds of hope. And somehow, impossibly, that had been enough. Enough to carry them through to the other side. Enough to allow them to be ready when opportunity finally came. "What do we do now?" Karl asked. "With all of these opportunities, how do we choose?" Maria was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We choose what honors the journey," she finally said. "What allows you to keep making music, but also to help others? What keeps us grounded and grateful? What makes Teresa proud?" Her wisdom, as always, cut through his confusion. She was right. The path forward was not about chasing every opportunity or maximizing income. It was about staying true to what mattered, to who they were, to what they valued. Music, family, community, kindness. If they made choices based on those principles, they would be fine. The next morning, Karl woke to find newspapers had been slipped under their door. The festival had made front-page news, and Karl's performance was featured prominently. The headlines praised his artistry and celebrated his inspiring story. One article called him a symbol of hope in difficult times. Another described the moment with Teresa as the most moving performance in festival history. Reading the words, Karl felt a complex mixture of pride and humility. He was glad his music had touched people. He was grateful for the recognition. But he also knew that he was just one person, one story among millions. His success did not make him special. It made him lucky. Lucky that Anna had stopped. Lucky that he had been given chances. Lucky that he had been able to seize those chances when they came. Over the following weeks, Karl's life found a new rhythm. He accepted a limited number of performance opportunities, enough to maintain his growing reputation, but not so many that music became a grind rather than a joy. He expanded his teaching at the music school, finding deep satisfaction in passing on what he had learned. He began working with the foundation to develop the scholarship program for young musicians, wanting to ensure that talent would not be wasted due to poverty. He continued his own studies with Helena, always seeking to improve, to deepen his understanding, to grow as an artist. And through it all, he made sure to prioritize his family, to be present for Maria and Teresa, to never lose sight of what truly mattered. 3 months after the festival, on a cold February afternoon, Karl found himself back at the community center where it had all begun. Anna had asked him to come speak to a group of volunteers who worked with disadvantaged populations. He stood in the same hall where he had performed that first concert, looking out at perhaps 30 people gathered to hear him. "I am not good at speeches," he began. "I am better with music than words. But Anna asked me to share my story, so I will try." He told them about the factory closing, about the 3 years on the street, about losing hope. He told them about Anna stopping, about that first conversation, about the recognition that changed everything. "I learned something important through this experience," Karl said. "I learned that we are all invisible until someone chooses to see us. We are all voiceless until someone chooses to listen. The difference between despair and hope is often just one person who cares enough to pay attention." He paused, looking at the faces watching him. "Many of you work with people who feel invisible, people who have been forgotten or dismissed by society. I want you to know that your attention matters. Your recognition matters. You may never know the full impact of your kindness, but trust that it ripples out in ways you cannot imagine. One conversation changed my life. Your one conversation could change someone else's life. Never underestimate the power of simply seeing someone and acknowledging their humanity." The volunteers asked questions, wanting advice on how to help people most effectively. Karl spoke honestly about what had helped him. Not just the money, though that was important. Not just the opportunity, though that was crucial. But the recognition. The simple act of being seen as a person of worth and dignity. That was what had given him the strength to try, to risk, to hope. Without Anna's recognition, he might have had opportunities and still been too broken to pursue them. The internal transformation had been as important as the external circumstances. That was what the volunteers needed to understand. Help was not just about resources. It was about restoring people's sense of self-worth, about reminding them that they mattered. After the talk, Anna walked Karl to the door. "You have become quite the speaker," she said with a smile. "I told you I am not good at speeches," Karl protested. Anna shook her head. "You speak from experience and from the heart. That is the most powerful kind of speech. Those volunteers will remember what you said. It will change how they work with people." They stood together in the doorway, looking out at the street where Karl had once played for coins. "Do you ever miss it?" Anna asked. "The simplicity of just standing on a corner with your violin?" Karl considered the question. Sometimes, he admitted, there was a purity to it. Just me and the music and nothing else. No expectations, no pressure. But I do not miss the desperation. I do not miss the fear. And I do not miss being invisible. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The city emerged from winter's grip, trees budding, flowers blooming, people shedding their heavy coats and stepping into the sunshine. Karel performed at the Spring Arts Festival, this time without nervousness, with confidence born of experience. His reputation had solidified. He was no longer a mousse-mousse, curiosity, or a feel-good story. He was simply a respected musician, one among many in the city's cultural landscape. That anonymity within recognition was exactly what he wanted. To be known for his work, but not defined by his past. To be valued for his art, but not turned into a symbol. To be a person living a life, not a character in a narrative. The scholarship fund in Karel's name awarded its first grants, supporting 3 young musicians from low-income families. Karel met each recipient, saw in their eyes the same hunger and hope he had once felt. He promised to mentor them, to share what he had learned, to help them navigate the path from poverty to possibility. Paying forward the kindness Anna had shown him became a central part of Karel's purpose. He understood now that receiving help created an obligation not to the giver, but to the universe, an obligation to extend that help to others when able. That was how communities healed. That was how cycles of poverty broke. Not through individual success stories, but through webs of mutual support and recognition. One evening in late spring, Karel stood on a stage at a small, intimate venue, performing for perhaps 60 people. It was not a grand festival or a major event. Just a regular concert, the kind he now did several times a month. As he played, he looked out at the audience and saw faces truly listening, truly engaged. He saw a young woman with tears running down her cheeks. He saw an elderly man with his eyes closed, lost in memory. He saw a couple holding hands, sharing the experience. He saw people being moved by his music, being transported, being reminded of beauty in a difficult world. This was why he played. Not for fame or money, though those were welcome, but for this, for connection, for the creation of shared moments of transcendence, for the affirmation that art matters, that beauty matters, that we are all bound together by our capacity to be moved. After the performance, as people filed out, several stopped to thank him. An older woman clasped his hand. "Your music reminded me of my father," she said. "He played violin when I was a girl. I had not thought of that in years. Thank you for bringing back those memories." A young man told him that he had been having a difficult week, and the concert had given him hope. A mother with a small child said her daughter wanted to learn violin after hearing Karel play. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, a reminder that his work touched individual lives in personal ways. He was not changing the world. He was changing moments, and moments accumulated became lives. Lives, connected, became communities. Walking home that night through the quiet streets, his violin case under his arm, Karel felt a profound sense of peace. He was not famous. He was not wealthy. But he was secure and purposeful and valued. He had work that mattered. He had a family that loved him. He had survived impossible odds and emerged not just intact, but stronger. The journey from that frozen street corner to this moment had been long and painful and ultimately transformative. He would not wish the pain on anyone, but he could not regret it either. It had shaped him. It had taught him what mattered. It had shown him the power of human kindness and the resilience of the human spirit. When he arrived home, Maria was waiting with tea and a warm embrace. Teresa was already asleep, her small form curled under blankets in her room. Karl sat with Maria in their comfortable living room, sipping tea, sharing stories from the evening. This was happiness, he realized. Not constant joy or excitement, but this, safety, warmth, love. The knowledge that tomorrow would come and they would face it together. The certainty that struggles might return, but they would endure. The gratitude for each ordinary moment that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. "I love you," he said to Maria, the words carrying the weight of everything they had survived together. "I love you too," she replied, her hand finding his across the small space between them. And in that moment, in that small apartment in that quiet city, a man who had once been invisible sat with the woman who had never stopped seeing him, and they were content.